There are traces in history that do not fit, fragments of the past that puzzle even science. Tonight you are going to step into a hidden world beneath layers of earth, myth, and time. Impossible artifacts, forgotten cities, and secrets that were never meant to be discovered. You are about to cross the threshold of mystery. Let us begin. The Klerksdorp Sphere. Deep within the ancient mines of South Africa, among layers of rock that geologists say are over 2,800,000,000 years old, small metallic spheres began to appear, spheres that, since their discovery, have continued to stir confusion. Miners call them spheres of the gods, as if fragments of something impossible had been preserved in the hardness of the underground, something that does not match the official history of humanity. What is unsettling is not just their age, but their shape, perfectly round, with grooves carved around the equator of each sphere, as if some unknown intelligence had taken the time to design them in a workshop that defies the laws of time. The first spheres were extracted near the city of Ottosdal, in the Transvaal region, a place where mining has brought to light more than one secret from Earth's deep past. Some are smooth, while others have 3 parallel grooves carved with a precision that would still be difficult to replicate today without specialized machinery. What is most perplexing is that these spheres are composed mostly of a type of hematite mixed with pyrite, materials that require very specific geological conditions to form and should not possess that level of symmetry if they were products of natural chance. Some even have a hardness that defies modern tools. When attempts are made to cut or scratch them, they resist with a solidity one would not expect from such a small stone. Official studies state that they are natural concretions, common geological formations that acquire unusual shapes when minerals cluster under particular conditions. But the explanation, although academically valid, does not silence those who have examined the spheres up close and found details that go beyond any whim of nature. Because there is something about them that provokes a discomfort hard to explain, a feeling that they do not belong there, that they are intruders in time, like pieces of a puzzle someone forgot to bury. One of the first scientists to speak about these spheres was South African geologist Roelf Marx, who studied them while working as curator at the Klerksdorp Museum. Marx observed that some of these spheres rotated on their own inside completely sealed display cases, without vibration or any external intervention. The phenomenon was recorded for several months, and although some tried to explain it through slight seismic activity or temperature variations, the true cause was never definitively determined. Marx went so far as to say that they seem to have been manufactured by someone, a statement which, coming from a scientist, sparked a wave of interest among alternative researchers and mystery seekers. The boldest theories claimed that the spheres could be technological artifacts from a lost civilization, perhaps pre-human, maybe not even from Earth. For those who defend this view, the grooves are not mere decorations or quirks of mineralogy, but signs of mechanical assembly, rotation marks, or clues about their use. Some believe they might have been parts of a more complex mechanism, perhaps a type of energy storage, a primitive battery, or a control sphere. Others, more inclined toward symbolism, think they are ritual objects, forgotten amulets that held encoded knowledge. Despite the many assumptions, the truth is that none of these ideas have been clearly proven. The scientific community remains skeptical, clinging to the geological explanation, while mystery enthusiasts collect photographs, samples, and testimonies to build a narrative that challenges the established timeline. Because accepting that these spheres were intentionally created almost 3 billion years ago would mean rewriting our entire evolutionary history, questioning the emergence of Homo sapiens, and accepting the possibility of a humanity before humanity. The context in which they are found also fuels the suspicion. The rocks where these spheres appeared belong to a geological formation known as the Wonderstone Group, whose age far exceeds any known trace of human activity. If these objects were indeed manipulated by an intelligent hand, that hand existed long before the dinosaurs, before any creature we might consider remotely close to modern humans. And that is what makes the mystery so hard to ignore. It is not just an isolated anomaly, but a question that touches the very core of our understanding of the past. One detail that often goes unnoticed, but has baffled more than one researcher, is the internal balance of some of these spheres. In certain cases, analyses have revealed that they are perfectly balanced, as if their center of mass had been calculated precisely. This level of accuracy does not occur in random formations. In fact, modern engineering requires advanced technology to achieve such symmetry in objects that small. How is it possible that something like this exists in rock layers that precede even multicellular organisms? Skepticism, of course, has its arguments. Some mineralogists have shown that similar formations can occur under very specific conditions, where pressure, temperature, and the presence of certain minerals cause concentric crystallization. Even so, the shape of these spheres, especially those with grooves, continues to defy explanation. Even if it were accepted that they are concretions, their regularity, their distribution, and their structure would still be unusual, almost unique in the known geological record. But beyond science, what truly brings the mystery of the Klerksdorp spheres to life is their symbolic impact. They represent a crack in the linear story of human history, a reminder that the past is not as clear as we believe. In a world where each generation feels closer to having understood everything, these small metallic spheres appear as silent witnesses to something that escapes our tools, our dates, even our language. The local legends, although scarce, also feed the enigma. Some elders from mining communities speak of sacred objects found deep in the earth, relics from an age of giants, or from visitors who came from the stars to teach the first living beings. These stories, passed down orally, have no scientific value, but they carry a narrative force that resonates with the oldest human intuition, the feeling that we are not alone, not now, and not before. Ultimately, the mystery of the Klerksdorp spheres does not reside solely in what they are, but in what they imply. They are a challenge to the arrogance of the present, an invitation to see the past not as a straight line, but as a deep ocean filled with islands we are only beginning to discover. Each sphere found is an echo of something we do not understand, a clue buried under millions of years of forgetfulness, waiting for someone to listen. And as long as they continue to appear in the depths of the earth, as long as they keep slowly rotating inside sealed display cases without anyone being able to explain why, they will continue to serve their purpose, to remind us that the history we think we know may not be the complete story, and that time hides secrets older than we dare to imagine. The Antikythera Machine of the ancient gods. In the dark depths of the Aegean Sea, among the rusted remains of an ancient shipwreck near the island of Antikythera, lay an object that would forever change the way we understand the technical knowledge of the ancient world. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than a collection of corroded metal fragments, eroded by centuries of salt water, covered in marine incrustations, and barely recognizable as anything meaningful. But time, study, and a deeper look revealed a hidden gear in history. A piece of engineering so advanced that even today, more than 100 years after its discovery, it remains difficult to fully explain. That mysterious object would become one of the most puzzling artifacts ever found, the Antikythera mechanism. It was in 1901 when a group of Greek divers, exploring the remains of a Roman shipwreck dated around the 1st century before our era, brought to the surface a series of statues and utensils. Among them appeared an irregular, greenish, and fragile mass that went unnoticed for years. It was not until archaeologists noticed remnants of inscriptions and gears that they began to realize that it was not just a marine oddity, but a machine. A real machine, with toothed wheels, axles, and calibrations that suggested a purpose far more complex than anything attributed to Mediterranean civilizations of that time. The reconstruction of the mechanism has been an odyssey in itself. Various teams of engineers, astronomers, historians, and experts in ancient technology have collaborated for decades to understand it, using X-rays, three-dimensional tomography, and virtual models that allow the interior of the artifact to be examined without damaging it. What they have discovered is extraordinary. A complex system of at least 30 bronze gears, arranged with mathematical precision to accurately predict the movements of the sun, the moon, and possibly the planets, as well as solar and lunar eclipses, and the Greek Olympic cycles. It was, in essence, an astronomical analog computer, one that, in terms of precision and miniaturization, would not have an equivalent in human history until many centuries later, in the Middle Ages or even the Renaissance. The puzzlement does not stop at its operation. What truly intrigues is the inevitable question that anyone facing this artifact must ask. How is it possible that in an era which, according to official history, lacked precision instruments, advanced lathes, or refined mathematical knowledge, someone could have built such a complex machine? Known Greek machinery in other contexts, pulleys, cranes, simple hydraulic devices, falls far short of the technical level implied by the Antikythera mechanism. It is not a case of gradual evolution, but of a sudden, almost inexplicable leap. Some scholars have suggested that the machine was the work of Hipparchus of Nicaea, or even Archimedes, although no direct evidence links these geniuses to the artifact. The inscriptions found on its surface speak of constellations, zodiac signs, lunar cycles that follow meticulous patterns, indicating that its creator or creators possessed not only exceptional technical knowledge, but also an extremely precise worldview of the observable universe. But if it was a Greek invention, then another, even more unsettling question arises. Why have no other similar devices been found? How could such a sophisticated technology appear like a flash in history, only to vanish without a trace? That lack of predecessors and successors is what fuels the most provocative theory, that the Antikythera mechanism was not a brilliant exception in Greek history, but a late remnant of a much older knowledge, transmitted, inherited, or recovered from earlier civilizations that had already mastered that level of technique. Some speculate that there may have been a technological tradition that goes back thousands of years earlier than what is currently accepted, perhaps linked to cultures that disappeared after natural cataclysms or were simply swallowed by oblivion. And it is here where the boundaries between history, myth, and mystery begin to blur. Because one thing that repeats across the oldest traditions, from the Hindu Vedas to the Sumerian tablets, through the Egyptian chronicles, is the mention of the ancient sages, the gods who taught men, mysterious figures who brought advanced knowledge and spread it among peoples. What if the Antikythera mechanism was not an original Greek invention, but a relic passed down, recreated from the fragments of a much more ancient wisdom? This hypothesis has been fueled by details rarely discussed in academic circles. For example, the level of miniaturization in the gears implies tools that, as far as we know, did not exist at the time. The toothed wheels have teeth so small and perfectly shaped that a high-precision lathe would be needed to create them, and there is no record of such an instrument being used in the ancient world. Even the design of the gears, with differential mechanisms that allow retrograde movements like that of Mars to be represented, appears to be centuries ahead of its time. Some modern engineers have admitted that, had they found the gears out of context, they would have dated them to the 17th century. Then arises a possibility that makes the most rational minds uncomfortable. Perhaps, somewhere in history, there existed a civilization with access to knowledge that was lost after a great destruction, a collapse that forced the survivors to preserve only fragments of what they once knew. In this light, the Antikythera mechanism would be like a piece from a destroyed library, a loose page that survived the fire of an entire age. And although the boldest theories even go as far as to suggest that there might have been external influence, beyond the Earth, beyond human history, the most intriguing thing is not whether these ideas are true or not, but what they reveal about our need to understand. Because the mechanism not only challenges history, it also awakens an ancient intuition, the certainty that there was something before us, something that history has not fully explained. Meanwhile, the original artifact remains on display at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, under a glass case that protects its fragile structure from air, light, and time. Working replicas have been built that show how it was possible to predict, with astonishing accuracy, the next eclipse or the return of a wandering planet. And yet, for every gear that turns in these reproductions, it seems a question turns with it. How many times has the story of humankind been written and rewritten without our knowledge? Perhaps the Antikythera Machine is not a unique artifact, but a message encapsulated in bronze. A warning that knowledge can be lost, that even the most advanced civilizations can vanish if they do not know how to preserve themselves. Or perhaps it is an invitation to search further, to dig not only beneath the earth, but in the folds of time, where secrets still wait, like rusted gears, to be set in motion once again. The Petrogliphs of Toro Muerto. In the arid heart of the Arequipa Desert, among silent hills and a sun that seems to hang suspended in the air, sprawls a rocky landscape that has safeguarded for centuries a secret as monumental as it is overlooked. This is Toro Muerto, one of the most enigmatic petroglyphic ensembles on the planet. A field of volcanic stone blocks etched with impossible figures that, even today, evade any definitive attempt at interpretation. There, in the far south of Peru, the past is engraved not only on the surface of the rocks, but also in a dimension that seems to challenge everything we think we know about pre-Columbian cultures, their worldview, and their contact, possible or symbolic, with intelligences that remain completely alien to us. The first thing that strikes upon arriving at Toro Muerto is not its desolation, nor the relentless sun, nor even the lack of marked paths or official centers protecting the site. What astonishes is the scale. More than 3,000 blocks scattered over an area of several square kilometers, each one covered with engravings in various styles, diverse techniques, and motifs ranging from the clearly human to the utterly incomprehensible. Some researchers claim that the actual number of petroglyphs could exceed 5,000, making Toro Muerto one of the largest rock art sites in the world. And yet, it remains one of the least deeply studied. Human figures appear frequently, but they are not realistic representations. Many display distorted proportions, oversized heads, thin limbs, enormous eyes looking upward or connecting with elements that seem to emanate from the sky. Some of these figures wear what appears to be ceremonial attire or helmets, with lines reminiscent of antennas or modern devices. These are not mere decorative images nor everyday scenes. There is an intent to communicate something profound, something the ancient inhabitants of the Mages Valley felt compelled to inscribe in stone forever. The animals, for their part, appear stylized, mingled among real creatures, such as llamas, birds, and snakes, and others that seem to have emerged from an unknown bestiary. Winged beings with reptilian forms, man-fish hybrids, and even what some identify as representations of extinct megafauna, such as mastodons or large felines no longer found in the region, have been documented. If the latter is true, it would imply that some engravings date to much earlier than commonly believed, going back thousands of years and casting doubt on the conventional chronologies assigned to the site. But perhaps the most perplexing aspect of Toro Muerto is not its individual figures, but the way they are arranged, the patterns that emerge when viewed from a distance, and the symbolic connections that appeared across the blocks as if they were part of a single, fragmented yet persistent narrative. Many independent researchers have suggested that the petroglyphs could have served as a kind of visual archive, a graphic language intended to preserve ancient knowledge that could not be transmitted by conventional means. Some go even further, asserting that what exists at Toro Muerto is a map, not of physical territories, but of cosmic routes, of precise astronomical moments marking the passage of larger cycles, perhaps even entire eras. A key piece of evidence for proponents of this hypothesis is the constant presence of geometric figures, concentric circles, spirals, grids, inverted triangles. These shapes recur, as if fulfilling a coding function that we have yet to decipher. On certain stones, these figures are carved with such precision that it seems impossible they were created without precision tools. And in many cases, they repeat in locations that, when plotted on a map, align with other distant cultures such as Nazca, Tiwanaku, or even the Central Andes. Traditional archaeologists attribute these engravings to the Wari culture or the inhabitants of the early intermediate period, but the dates are imprecise and vary widely depending on the source. There is no direct dating of the engravings, which complicates scientific study. The only certainty is that Toro Muerto was in use centuries before the arrival of the Incas, and its style does not fully fit known cultural patterns in the region. There is something more ancient, more archaic about these stones, a will to permanence that crosses generations. And yet, what most captivates those who visit the place is not so much the content of the petroglyphs, but the sensation the site itself produces. A dense, silent, almost reverential energy, as if one were entering a sacred space where something still lives, something awaiting comprehension. Visitors commonly describe an altered perception of time, a sort of mental pause that seems to slow thoughts down, forcing one to look and look again, as if the stones are begging to be read, but without telling us how. Modern studies using drones and photogrammetry have begun to reveal an even more unsettling pattern. Many of the stones are not randomly placed. Some alignments seem to correspond with astronomical phenomena, such as solstices or certain lunar events. Others follow the lines of ancient pilgrimage routes, marking key points in the landscape that held spiritual or energetic value for ancestral cultures. This has led to the idea that Toro Muerto was more than a place of artistic expression. It was a connection point, a node in an invisible network of knowledge and observation. The most alternative theories even propose that these inscriptions were executed under altered states of consciousness, induced by rituals, fasting, or entheogenic substances. This would explain the distorted forms, the figures that appear fused with celestial elements, and the constant presence of repetitive symbols, as if the engravers were trying to capture an inner vision shared among them. In this context, Toro Muerto transforms into a kind of vision book, a library carved with the images of a collective experience that transcends logic. And amid all this, there are details that defy any category. Some petroglyphs clearly depict vehicles, structures with mechanical legs, figures inside capsules or dressed in suits reminiscent of modern diving gear. These images have been seized upon by proponents of the ancient astronaut theory, who claim that Toro Muerto is direct evidence of contact with entities that came from the sky. Although this hypothesis is rejected by academia, it cannot be denied that some figures possess an unsettling modernity, a clarity in their shapes that sets them apart from the rest of the engravings. The lack of written records, the site's minimal protection, and the scattering of the blocks hinder a comprehensive reading of the place. Yet perhaps that is precisely Toro Muerto's greatest mystery, its resistance to classification. It is a message in fragments, a voice carved in rock that cannot be contained by a single interpretation. Anyone who has walked its paths among stones, under the scorching sun and the distant echo of mountains, knows that there is something there that transcends archaeology. A kind of ancient heartbeat still felt underfoot, as if the rocks still hold the vibration of those who carved them with an intent we have yet to understand. Toro Muerto remains there, exposed to wind, time, and oblivion. But for those who stop to look, it reveals itself as one of the greatest enigmas in human history, an open portal to a world that perhaps was not as we were told. Perhaps what lies there is not a mystery to be solved, but a mirror reminding us that even now, in the midst of the digital age, we are only beginning to read the first lines of a story far deeper, older, and more complex than we ever imagined. The Cave of Bruniquel and its mysterious ring. In the southwest of France, nestled among forested hills and small villages that seem suspended in time. There is a dark opening in the limestone rock that, for thousands of years, remained sealed by the weight of oblivion and sediment. It is a silent cave, without grand decorations, without multicolored paintings shouting its age. But deep within its galleries, over 300 meters from natural light, lies one of the most unsettling archaeological discoveries of recent history. A circular structure made from carefully arranged stalagmite fragments whose existence challenges everything previously believed about Neanderthals and their symbolic abilities. The Bruniquel cave was rediscovered in 1990 by a group of amateur spelunkers. As they ventured inside, they saw something they did not expect to find. Not a work of nature, but a construction made with a clear intention, a rudimentary yet precise geometry, a kind of stone ring formed with over 400 broken stalagmite pieces, aligned, stacked, and held together. At the time, no one could have imagined that what they were seeing was nearly 176,000 years old. That date was confirmed through uranium-thorium dating in the year 2016, thanks to a team of scientists led by Jacques Joubert of the University of Bordeaux. What the analyses revealed was astonishing. The structure was built long before Homo sapiens appeared in Europe. In other words, the creators of the Bruniquel ring were Neanderthals. Those beings who, for decades, were considered mere scavengers of prehistory, incapable of abstract thought or ritual behavior, had been able to build, in complete darkness, a planned, organized, and undoubtedly symbolic structure. The ring has an elliptical shape, composed of two irregular circles. The stalagmites were cut with precision, probably using rudimentary stone tools, and placed in such a way that they would neither fall nor slide. Some are stacked, others supported with stone wedges, and many show burn marks, as if they had been exposed to controlled fire. In the center of the structure, remains of soot and charcoal were found, indicating it was used with fire, perhaps for illumination, or perhaps for a deeper purpose. All of this implies a level of mental organization that, until recently, was believed to be reserved for modern humans. The Neanderthals of Bruniquel had to plan the construction, select the materials, transport them from other parts of the cave, break them into manageable sections, distribute them carefully, and keep a fire burning in an enclosed, sunless environment. It is no minor feat. It requires coordination, spatial memory, long-term planning, and probably a social structure that allowed them to work as a group without conflict. This is not simply about survival. There is a component of symbolism here, of intention, perhaps even of ritual, and that is where the mystery deepens. Because if this stone ring was part of a ritual, what were the Neanderthals doing down there? What meaning could this deep, inaccessible, dangerous space have held for them? In other European caves, Homo sapiens left cave paintings depicting hunting scenes, abstract figures, handprints made with pigment. But Bruniquel predates all of that. Here, there are no images, no traces of figurative art. But there is a structure that conveys the same message: the need to leave a mark, to modify the environment, to create something that was not there before. And doing so in complete darkness, with the risk of venturing into the unknown, speaks of a spiritual or symbolic dimension that we have taken too long to recognize. Some researchers have proposed that it was a primitive sanctuary, a place where Neanderthals performed ceremonies related to the passage of time, death, or connection with forces beyond their everyday understanding. The cave, by its silent, humid, and eternal nature, has always symbolized the womb of the earth, the place where life begins and ends. Accessing its depths was, in many cultures, a sacred act. Perhaps Bruniquel was the setting for something similar, a space reserved for a few, where the boundaries of the human and the unknown were crossed. Others, more skeptical, suggest that the structure may have had a practical function, such as a temporary shelter or storage space. But that explanation weakens in the face of the unnecessary effort required to build something so complex, so far from the entrance. If the Neanderthals were seeking warmth or protection, there were more accessible places. The fact that they chose to penetrate to the deepest part, where not a single ray of light enters, where silence is absolute and air is scarce, suggests a different motivation. Something drove them to go further, to create with a purpose not related to mere survival. And then a possibility arises that has made many uncomfortable. Perhaps the Neanderthals had a symbolic life as rich as ours. Perhaps they thought about death, about spirits, about the mystery of fire and time. Perhaps they were not the speechless brutes history painted for centuries, but profoundly sensitive beings, capable of awe, of fear, of reverence. If that is true, then the entire narrative we have constructed about human evolution must be revised, because what makes us human did not begin with us. It was already there, in other species, latent, alive, expressing itself in ways we are only beginning to understand. Some proponents of more heterodox theories have gone even further, suggesting that the Bruniquel ring could be a symbolic replica of the sky, a rudimentary map of the constellations, or a calendar of cosmic cycles. The burn marks, according to this interpretation, would represent celestial phenomena or sacred moments. While there is no conclusive evidence to support this idea, the geometry of the structure and its arrangement have drawn the attention of archaeoastronomers who believe that even early hominids could observe and record the sky in more detail than we assume. And then there is the fact that, since its discovery, the cave has been studied with extreme care. Its sealed atmosphere for millennia has allowed for exceptional preservation. The pieces remain in the exact place where they were placed by ancient hands, which has made Bruniquel an unparalleled time capsule. Every fragment of stalagmite, every trace of fire, every particle of charcoal tells a story that we are still learning to read. The cave is not open to the public, and that has helped keep its mystery intact. The existing images were taken with artificial light, and in them, something more than an archaeological site can be perceived. There is a heavy stillness, a sense that time has stopped. The darkness, the stone, the silence. Everything invites us to think that something profound happened there, something that left a mark on those who lived it, something important enough to be engraved in the heart of the earth. Bruniquel is a reminder that the past is much vaster and more complex than we believe, that the line between the human and the other is blurrier than we would like to admit, and that sometimes the most revealing clues are not found in great ancient cities, nor in pyramids, nor in monuments visible from space, but in a hidden stone ring in the shadows, built by beings who, without words, told us they, too, knew how to dream. The Enigma of the Texas Hammer. In a small town in eastern Texas, lost among dusty roads and vast stretches of quiet fields, one of those discoveries took place that, from the moment they come to light, remain wrapped in a thick fog of controversy, suspicion, and fascination. It was in the year 1936 when a couple, Max and Emma Hahn, during a walk through a rocky area near the town of London, found a strange stone formation from which a metallic piece protruded. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, a broken rock, a curious iron inclusion. But what that block of stone contained would become one of the most debated pieces of the modern archaeological enigma. There, within the stone bed, perfectly embedded as if it had been trapped in a natural mold, was a hammer. The object itself does not have a particularly extraordinary appearance. A handle of fossilized wood partially still visible, and a simply shaped compact iron head, with one flat end and one rounded, very similar to hammers used in the 19th century. However, what has turned the so-called London hammer, as many alternative researchers know it, into a recurring mystery is the context in which it was found. According to various analyses and geological estimates, the surrounding rock formation would belong to the Cretaceous period, an era that dates back more than 100 million years. That simple fact, if true, would completely alter the chronological timeline of human and technological history. From the beginning, the discovery set off alarms among those who defend an orthodox view of history. It could not be. The tool had all the characteristics of a modern artifact. How could it be encased in a stone nodule of such abysmal age? The immediate response, of course, was skepticism. Many geologists argued that mineral concretions can form in much shorter periods than is commonly believed, especially under certain conditions of pressure, temperature, and environmental chemistry. According to this explanation, the hammer would not be a prehistoric object, but a tool made by some 19th century settler that became buried in an environment that facilitated its partial fossilization. However, not all experts have been satisfied with that interpretation. Some analyses, carried out independently, have revealed that the hammer's head is composed of 96% iron, along with traces of chlorine and sulfur, which gives it a remarkable resistance to oxidation. This unusual alloy has attracted the curiosity of metallurgists, who acknowledge that the absence of rust is, at the very least, striking. If the hammer was made more than 100 years ago and was exposed to a humid environment, why does it show no signs of corrosion? Other elements add further layers to the mystery. The wooden handle, partially fossilized, presents a structure that indicates a long process of mineralization which is incompatible, according to some paleobotany experts, with a mere age of 150 years. And, as if that were not enough, the integration of the metal with the stone matrix appears so compact that it gives the impression of having been part of the solidification process, as if the hammer had been there from the beginning, trapped as the rock formed around it. This type of find is known in the world of alternative archaeology as U-parts, out-of-place artifacts, and the Texas hammer is one of its most emblematic representatives. Those who defend them claim that these objects are remnants of forgotten civilizations, material traces of technologies that existed in a deep past, long before the appearance of Homo sapiens as we know it. For those who support this line of thought, the hammer would not be a modern tool accidentally dropped into an unusual environment, but a tangible reminder that the history of humanity, and perhaps of the planet itself, is much more complex and unknown than textbooks would have us believe. Over the decades, the hammer has been the subject of all kinds of theories. Some link it to antediluvian civilizations, perhaps related to the myth of Atlantis, or to lost cultures that may have developed advanced technologies before being wiped out by global cataclysms. Others go even further and associate it with the possibility of extraterrestrial intervention, suggesting that what seems to us today like a simple work tool could have been part of a much more sophisticated set of equipment, with purposes we still cannot comprehend. The artifact was for years in the hands of private collectors and exhibited in small alternative history museums, which made rigorous evaluation from the academic field difficult. Attempts to gain access for testing with current scientific methodologies have, in many cases, been blocked for ideological reasons, or due to the reluctance of its owners to allow handling that might damage the piece. This isolation has generated even more controversy, fueling the suspicion that it is an inconvenient case, one that many would rather ignore than face its disruptive potential. The truth is that, beyond its real origin, the Texas hammer has become a symbol. It represents everything that science has not yet been able to fully explain. A fissure in the official chronological narrative that invites us to look at the past with fewer certainties and more questions. Because although many experts deny its value as historical evidence, the fact is that no explanation so far has managed to close the case with absolute conviction. Perhaps the greatest value of the hammer does not lie in what it is, but in what it awakens. Its mere existence forces us to consider a deeply unsettling possibility: that we do not know our entire history, that beneath our feet lie not only layers of earth and stone, but also of lost knowledge, of lives lived in forgotten eras, of cultures that left barely a mark like this one, waiting to be recognized. In a world where everything seems explainable, where science advances with the illusion that one day it will know everything. Findings like this act as uncomfortable reminders that mystery persists. The Texas hammer remains there, intact in its ambiguity, solid in its silence. It does not demand to be believed, but neither does it allow itself to be ignored. It is a question without an answer, an improbable object that dwells on the frontier between geology and myth, between accepted history and the one that still refuses to be written. Perhaps someday, it will be analyzed with even more advanced technology. Or maybe another similar discovery elsewhere on the planet will shed new light on its origin. Until then, it will continue to be a topic of conversation, a fragment of an enigma, an invitation to look beyond the obvious. And for those who still dare to question, a symbol that the Earth, no matter how much it is explored, continues to guard secrets that escape our logic and understanding. The Fuente Magna of Bolivia. Just a few kilometers from Lake Titicaca, on the outskirts of the city of La Paz, nestled between the dry slopes of the Bolivian highlands and the distant echoes of ancient civilizations that left their marks among the stones, lies one of the most puzzling objects on the American continent, the Fuente Magna. Also known as the Rosette of the Americas or the Bowl of the Gods, this stone vessel, apparently discovered in the early decades of the 20th century, has become a silent symbol of everything that does not fit, a fragment of history that seems to have been torn from another time, and even from another world. The Fuente Magna is a large container carved out of dark stone, shaped like a ceremonial bowl or a ritual basin. Its exterior is decorated with motifs typical of Andean cultures, zoomorphic figures, and stylizations that could be associated with indigenous traditions. But it is inside where the real mystery begins. Carefully carved on its curved surface are inscriptions that have puzzled archaeologists, epigraphers, and linguists for decades. Because what appears inside the Fuente Magna does not seem to come from the Andean highlands, nor from any pre-Columbian writing system. What is seen there bears a disturbing resemblance to the cuneiform script of ancient Sumer. And this is where the mystery takes on a weight that is hard to ignore. How is it possible that in Bolivia, in the middle of the Andes, an object has appeared bearing inscriptions that point directly to the Mesopotamian world, over 12,000 kilometers away? How could a writing system that officially developed in the 3rd millennium before our era, in what is now Iraq, have made its way there, without any record of contact between these two cultures? The discovery was attributed to a landowner named Maximiliano Portugal Zamora, who found the piece near the archaeological site of Tiwanaku. Although his discovery was neither officially published nor documented in scientific journals, over time it began to circulate among collectors and independent researchers, until it reached the hands of the Argentine epigrapher Humberto P. Cabrera, who, in collaboration with ancient language expert Clyde Winters, identified what they believed to be a Proto-Sumerian text. According to their conclusions, the inscription not only made sense, but appeared to be a religious offering dedicated to the goddess Nia, a Sumerian deity associated with fertility and the cycles of nature. For more conventional scholars, the possibility that an object with Sumerian writing could appear in the Americas is simply unacceptable. The explanations range from deliberate forgery to confusion with other forms of indigenous writing that, by coincidence, might resemble Mesopotamian symbols. However, those who have examined the piece in detail point out that the complexity of the lines, the style of the writing, and the internal coherence of the text suggest an authenticity that is hard to dismiss. The piece, currently safeguarded in a small museum in the city of La Paz, has been the subject of very few academic studies. Most official archaeological institutions have kept it at arm's length, perhaps due to the difficulty of dealing with a finding of such implications. Because if the Fuente Magna is authentic, if it truly is a pre-Columbian artifact with Mesopotamian writing, then the narrative about the origins of American civilizations would need to be completely revised. The hypothesis that transoceanic contacts existed between cultures of the Old and New Worlds long before Columbus's arrival would cease to be a marginal speculation and become a documented fact. And then, theories emerge. Some speak of Sumerian navigators crossing the Atlantic in reed boats, driven by equatorial winds, following routes similar to those that thousands of years later, Thor Heyerdahl would explore in his experimental expeditions. Others suggest the existence of a mother civilization, predating all those we know, that spread across the planet after a great cataclysm, leaving fragments of its culture in different corners of the globe, like scattered pieces of a historical puzzle we have yet to reassemble. There are even those who dare to link the Fuente Magna to Atlantis, or to the tales of ancient instructor gods who traveled from one continent to another, sharing knowledge. The Lake Titicaca region is, in itself, a land charged with ancestral symbolism. Aymara and Inca legends place there the birth of their first gods, the origin of time and of civilization itself. The megalithic structures of Tiwanaku, with their perfectly carved stone blocks, their astronomical alignment, and their apparent antiquity, seem to be part of a much broader story than what has been told. That an object like the Fuente Magna was found so close to this place is no small detail. Some believe that Tiwanaku may have been a city built atop a much older settlement, one whose culture had connections with other civilizations that vanished or were displaced thousands of years ago. And yet, the greatest mystery of the Fuente Magna does not lie in its geographic origin, nor in the language of its inscriptions, but in the resistance its existence has provoked. Why has something so singular been excluded from academic debate? Why have no conclusive archaeometric studies been conducted, with international laboratories and rigorous methodologies, to definitively establish its age, its geological origin, its exact composition? The answer, though not explicit, seems to lie in the vertigo caused by the impossible. Because accepting the authenticity of the Fuente Magna would not just mean adding a line to history books, but rewriting entire chapters, acknowledging that our cultures may have been connected by threads that time has tried to erase. For those who have had the opportunity to see it up close, the object does not give the impression of falsehood or fabrication. There is something solemn in its form, something ancestral in its texture. The stone seems to have endured centuries of use or exposure, and the carvings possess a depth that reveals the patient work of expert hands. The interior of the bowl, with its clean and deliberate strokes, invites one to read, even if its message remains unknown to us. It is as if the stone whispers an ancient story, a story buried under layers of forgetfulness, waiting for someone to dare to listen. The Fuente Magna remains there, silent, frozen in time, waiting to be accepted, understood, or perhaps simply seen with less conditioned eyes. Maybe one day more similar pieces will appear, and other objects will corroborate what this vessel already suggests. Or perhaps it will remain a solitary witness, a reminder that the past has more layers than we can imagine, and that sometimes the greatest enigma fits inside a carved bowl, forgotten on a dusty slope of the Bolivian highlands. A bowl that may contain, among its symbols in stone, the impossible trace of a world that once was, and that history still refuses to remember. The hidden civilization of Göbekli Tepe. In the hills of southeastern Turkey, where the horizon seems to melt under the desert sun and the wind carries ancient whispers of forgotten civilizations, lies one of the most puzzling discoveries of the modern world. Göbekli Tepe does not rise, does not shine, nor does it shout its presence from afar. On the contrary, it lies hidden beneath a modest hill that for centuries was considered just another natural elevation among many in the arid landscape. However, what rests beneath that earth has shaken the foundations of archaeology and has forced us to rewrite, or at least to revisit in awe, the earliest chapters of human history. It was in the 1990s when a team of archaeologists led by Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute decided to excavate what, until then, was considered little more than an unimportant rock formation. What they began to unearth, however, turned out to be a monumental structure, made up of enormous stone pillars arranged in concentric circles, some of them over 5 meters tall and weighing 20 tons. What was surprising was not only the size or the precision with which they were placed, but the age of the entire site. Later dating would confirm something that seemed impossible. Göbekli Tepe was built more than 11,500 years ago, long before writing was invented, long before the wheel, long before agriculture transformed humans into sedentary beings. This isolated fact alone would be enough to make Göbekli Tepe a global enigma. But when the full site is observed, what emerges is not just a colossal architectural work for its time, but a deeply disturbing symbol. The evidence that there once existed a civilization capable of carving, transporting, and erecting megaliths with a technical mastery that, according to the traditional view, should not have existed yet. What official theories tell us is that humanity, in that period, was just beginning to form small groups of hunter-gatherers, without permanent settlements or complex hierarchies. However, what is seen at Göbekli Tepe does not fit that picture. Someone had to plan its design, coordinate dozens, if not hundreds of people, sculpt the reliefs with symbolic precision, and then bury it deliberately, as if they knew they were leaving a message meant for the future. The carved sculptures on the pillars are another of the aspects that add a layer of complexity and bewilderment. There are reliefs of animals that no longer inhabit the region, including lions, bulls, snakes, birds of prey, boars, and even strange humanoid figures with stylized arms that stretch around the blocks. What is even more intriguing is the symbolic nature of these figures. They seem to be placed strategically, as if telling a story we do not yet understand, as if each circle represented a moment, a cycle, a forgotten ceremonial function. Some researchers have suggested that Göbekli Tepe may have been an astronomical observatory. The alignments of its pillars, the arrangement of the figures, and certain engraved motifs that might represent constellations give rise to the idea that it was a center of cosmic knowledge. Others, more oriented toward anthropological interpretation, believe it was a sanctuary where spiritual rituals were performed, perhaps linked to the transition between life and death. Whatever the exact function of the site may have been, what is undeniable is that it required a level of organizational and cognitive complexity that was not expected to be found in such an early era. But the most baffling part, what elevates Göbekli Tepe from an extraordinary archaeological discovery to a true challenge to our understanding of human history, is the decision to bury it. Because the stone circles were covered intentionally with tons of soil, debris, and materials that sealed it almost hermetically. This was not an accidental abandonment. It was a deliberate closure, a planned farewell. Why would anyone bury a sacred complex, built with such monumental effort shortly after completing it? What did its builders know that we have forgotten? That question has ignited all kinds of theories, from the most moderate to the boldest. Some archaeologists believe that the climate change that marked the end of the last ice age may have forced the site's abandonment. Others speculate that a spiritual or social revolution motivated communities to change their rituals, and that Göbekli Tepe was buried as part of a new cultural paradigm. But there are also those who see in this act a deeper intention, perhaps a way to protect the site from an unknown threat, or to preserve its legacy for a future humanity that would one day rediscover it. Among alternative thought circles, there are those who claim that Göbekli Tepe is the clearest remnant of a vanished advanced civilization. Not an isolated culture, but a global society whose traces have been erased by the centuries, by cataclysms, or by simple forgetfulness. From this perspective, the site would be a fragment of an older world, from an era prior to the Neolithic, in which there existed a profound knowledge of the sky, of energy, and of human purpose. A world that may have collapsed for reasons still unknown, but that left behind clues carefully placed to be found when humanity was ready to understand them. And while these ideas are difficult to verify, the truth is that Göbekli Tepe has provoked a crisis in historical interpretation. The existence of a megalithic complex predating the domestication of plants and animals implies that spirituality, or the sense of transcendence, was what drove social organization and not the other way around. That is, the first great human constructions were not born of economic or defensive needs, but from a symbolic search, from a yearning to connect with something higher. This contradicts many of the fundamental theories of traditional anthropology. Since its discovery, only a fraction of the entire site has been explored. Satellite images and geomagnetic studies have revealed the presence of dozens of structures still buried, suggesting that Göbekli Tepe may be far more extensive than originally thought. And as excavation continues, new questions arise, new patterns, new figures that seem to speak to us from the threshold of prehistory. But despite the investigations, the studies, the publications, and the theories, the mystery remains. Göbekli Tepe is not simply a temple. It is a message carved in stone by hands that somehow knew they were building for the future. It is a half-open door to a past that challenges everything we believe we know about ourselves. And while its circles continue to emerge from the earth, slowly and solemnly, they will keep speaking, stone by stone, of a lost civilization that once dared to raise columns toward the sky, long before history began to be written. The underwater circles of Yonaguni. In the westernmost region of the Japanese archipelago, very close to the maritime border between Japan and Taiwan, lies a little-known island called Yonaguni. The surrounding landscape is serene, with gentle hills and rocky beaches, but beneath its waters, just about 25 meters deep, hides one of the most unsettling discoveries of recent decades. A series of submerged structures that have sparked a heated debate among scientists, archaeologists, and explorers of the unexplained. What is popularly known as the Yonaguni Monument is, in reality, a group of stone formations that, at first glance, defy the natural processes of geology. And at the center of it all, what causes the greatest confusion is a series of platforms, steps, and right angles that seem to have been carved by human hands, although their suggested age could push back the timeline of civilization thousands of years beyond what is currently accepted. The discovery was accidental. In the year 1986, a diving instructor named Kihachiro Aratake was exploring the southern coast of the island when, diving in search of areas rich in marine life, he encountered a massive structure that seemed to rise from the ocean floor like a kind of submerged stone temple. What he saw did not look like a reef or an ordinary coral formation. It was a series of perfectly aligned blocks, with sharp edges, terraces on different levels, staircases, and what appeared to be a sort of grandstand. Surprised by the geometric shape of the structure, he decided to inform the local authorities, and since then, the site has become a pilgrimage point for researchers and curious people from around the world. What sets Yonaguni apart from other underwater formations is not simply its size or shape, but the accumulation of elements that seem to have been designed with intent. The platforms have right-angled cuts that are difficult to attribute to natural processes. There are vertical walls rising more than 5 meters high, stairways leading to flat areas as if it were a ceremonial plaza, and narrow channels cutting through the stone slabs with a precision reminiscent of megalithic stonework. In the most well-known part of the complex, a kind of stepped pyramid rises from the sea floor with an orientation that, according to some studies, aligns with significant astronomical points during the summer solstice. The debate over the nature of the monument has divided the scientific community. For a portion of geologists, it is a natural formation caused by the fragmentation of sedimentary rocks due to earthquakes, marine erosion, and other geological phenomena common in the region. The type of rock, a very compact sandstone, tends to fracture into rectangular blocks when subjected to tectonic pressure, which would explain the angular shape of the structures. From this perspective, Yonaguni would be nothing more than a whim of nature, a geological coincidence that has been misinterpreted by human imagination. However, those who have studied the site from an archaeological point of view see too many coincidences. Professor Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyus, has spent over 2 decades analyzing Yonaguni and asserts that the formations show unequivocal signs of human intervention. Kimura has documented carvings on the rocks, loose stone structures that could have been monoliths, and even a sort of paved road connecting several sections of the complex. According to his estimates, the site could have been above sea level at the end of the last ice age, which would place its age at around 12,000 years, long before the emergence of the great known civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, or China. This point is crucial. If Yonaguni is a human construction, then it was created by a culture that appears in no history book, a civilization that existed before the Neolithic and disappeared without a trace, perhaps swallowed by the very ocean that now guards its ruins. This would radically change our understanding of the past, because it would imply that humans were already capable of designing, planning, and executing monumental architectural works at a time when, officially, they still lived in small nomadic groups dedicated to hunting and gathering. And so, theories arise. Some researchers have begun linking Yonaguni with the oldest Japanese myths, with the tales of the Ryujin, wise and eternal sea dragons, and the legends of Mu, the lost continent of the Pacific. The idea of a sunken land inhabited by an advanced civilization is not new in the imagination of many cultures. What makes Yonaguni a special case is that, for the first time, there might be a material basis for those stories, a tangible trace that resists both time and the ocean's depths. Other, more radical proposals relate the site to Atlantis, placing it not in the Atlantic as Plato proposed, but in the Pacific, as part of a network of advanced cultures that may have existed in various parts of the planet before being wiped out by global cataclysms. According to this hypothesis, Yonaguni would not be alone. It would be one of many remnants of a forgotten past lying beneath the waters, from the coasts of India to those of the Caribbean, waiting to be rediscovered. Despite the skepticism, the site has been explored by numerous divers, scientists, and documentary filmmakers. The images captured are impressive. The clean lines, the symmetries, the reliefs, and the dimensions of the place convey a feeling that goes beyond the purely geological. It is as if the very stone retained the intention of whoever shaped it, as if by diving into those waters, one were walking among the remnants of a city sunken in time, silent yet still pulsing. And the most disturbing thing is that everything seems to have been forgotten abruptly. There are no traces of written culture, no tools, no bone remains, nor direct evidence indicating who the possible builders were. Only the shapes, the carved stone, and the sea. That archaeological silence has been interpreted by some as proof of its falsehood, but for others, it is precisely what makes Yonaguni such a profound mystery. Because time does not erase everything in an orderly way. Sometimes what remains are only fragments, half-finished structures, clues without context. And the task of the present is to reconstruct the story with what little has survived. To this day, Yonaguni has not been officially recognized as an archaeological site, which limits the possibility of formal investigations, but interest continues to grow. Every year, new expeditions dive in to record, measure, and compare the structures. The ocean, patient and dense, becomes the witness and guardian of a past that has not yet spoken its final word. Perhaps we will never know with certainty whether it was a city, a temple, a ceremonial center, or simply a geological marvel. But the truth is that Yonaguni remains there, submerged beneath the blue waves of a remote corner of the world, like a puzzle that defies time, history, and our certainties. And as long as the currents continue sweeping across its surface, as long as divers continue descending in awe between its walls, the mystery will continue to breathe, between the stone and the water, like an echo of something that once was, and that perhaps is still waiting for us. The energy of the Stones of Ica. In the middle of the Peruvian desert, just a few kilometers from the city of Ica, beneath a clear sky that seems to have forgotten the rush of the modern world, one of Latin America's most baffling mysteries is kept. A puzzle that has divided experts, intrigued adventurers, and sparked a flood of theories ranging from the absurd to the revealing. We are talking about the so-called Stones of Ica, a collection of thousands of andesite rocks engraved with images that challenge established history, but that also seem to contain something more. A strange vibration, an energy charge difficult to define, as if within their surface was encoded knowledge that does not entirely belong to our time. These stones began to circulate in the 1960s when local farmers started offering them to tourists as local curiosities. Some were small, the size of a hand, others truly monumental, weighing over 30 or 40 kilograms. All of them, however, shared one common trait. Their surfaces were precisely engraved with scenes impossible to place within any known archaeological narrative. There were depictions of men riding dinosaurs, detailed surgical operations, star maps, telescopes, organ transplants, and even machines that seemed to come from a science fiction novel. Soon, the collection caught the attention of a local doctor, Dr. Javier Cabrera Darquea, who would dedicate the rest of his life to studying them, protecting them, and defending a theory that for many was too risky. The existence of a civilization prior to ours, more advanced in certain aspects, which had disappeared long before the beginning of official history. What made the matter even more baffling was the number. Cabrera managed to gather more than 11,000 stones, all engraved in the same style, with the same type of mineral, the same stroke, and without signs of repetition or mechanical patterns that would indicate mass production. Each stone seemed unique, containing a fragment of a much larger story, as if they were scattered pages of a lost encyclopedia. For him, there was no doubt. The stones were the remnants of an archive of knowledge that had survived the passage of millennia, hidden beneath the desert sand until fate allowed it to come to light again. One of the least discussed but most unsettling aspects of the Stones of Ica is the sensation many have reported when physically touching them. Visitors to the museum founded by Cabrera, independent researchers, and even skeptics have claimed to feel a subtle warmth, a faint vibration, as if the stones emitted a form of energy imperceptible to the eye, but deeply real to the senses. It is not something easily measured with conventional instruments, but it is an experience repeated too often to be completely dismissed. Some say that after holding a stone for several minutes, they feel a strange mental clarity, a kind of intense calm, as if the engraved images acted as catalysts for something deeper. This energetic dimension has been little explored, perhaps because it is too intangible for traditional scientific analysis, but it remains present in the narrative of the mystery surrounding these rocks. Regarding their origin, conventional studies have tried to dismantle the phenomenon by arguing that many of the stones could have been recently made by the farmers themselves for economic purposes. It is true that in some cases the existence of forgeries has been proven, crude copies seeking to take advantage of the tourist boom generated by Cabrera's museum. However, reducing the phenomenon to a simple, massive fraud requires ignoring too many elements that escape that explanation. The best stones, those with greater complexity, symmetry, and depth of engraving, show a patina of oxidation that, according to certain analyses, would have required centuries to form. Furthermore, the anatomical detail of the surgeries represented, the use of advanced surgical instruments, and the consistency among the different scenes indicate medical knowledge far superior to any recorded pre-Columbian culture. The astronomical images engraved on the stones also do not go unnoticed. Some depict constellations as they would be seen from non-earthly observation points, and others show maps of the solar system with disturbing precision. There are representations suggesting an understanding of the asteroid belt, lunar phases, and planetary alignments that modern science could only confirm with space technology. This level of knowledge raises an inevitable question. Who were the true authors of these stones? There are various theories, The most cautious holds that they belong to a lost culture, possibly predating the Andean civilization, which had reached a notable level of development before disappearing without a trace. Some have tried to link these ideas with local legends about the Gentiles, wise and mysterious beings who lived before the time of the Incas and mastered the arts of medicine, astronomy, and stone. A more radical current proposes that the stones are proof of contact with non-human intelligences, beings who transmitted this knowledge to primitive human groups, perhaps as part of a civilizing task or a cohabitation experience. Some even argue that the stones are energetic records, which rather than containing images, hold frequencies, codes engraved in the material that we are only now beginning to perceive. One of the most curious elements is that Dr. Cabrera claimed the stones contained not only images of the past, but also of the future. In his interpretation, many of the scenes showed the collapse of an advanced civilization, similar to ours, which self-destructed by losing balance with the planet. He saw in the stones a warning, a kind of legacy left for us with the hope of avoiding the same fate. This prophetic vision, accompanied by the mysterious aura of the desert and the presence of thousands of silent stones organized like an arcane library, built around the phenomenon a modern myth, a kind of living relic of time. Despite academic skepticism and the discredit some sectors have cast over the topic, the Stones of Ica remain. They occupy entire rooms of the small museum founded by Cabrera, rest in private collections, and occasionally appear in antique markets or in lost houses in the country's interior. Their energy, whatever it may be, continues to be present. They are objects that invite, that unsettle, that raise more questions than answers. Perhaps they are not conclusive proof of a lost civilization. Perhaps their message was not meant to be understood in this time. But the truth is that the Stones of Ica continue resisting oblivion, as if waiting, silent and patient, for an open mind to read them beyond their images. For someone, someday, to understand that what they hold is not a simple drawing carved in rock, but the echo of knowledge we should never have lost. An ancient whisper encapsulated in stone, waiting to awaken again. Adam's calendar in South Africa. In the highlands of Mpumalanga, South Africa, where the wind caresses the golden grass and the mountains rise with serene majesty, there is a stone formation that, at first glance, might be mistaken for the scattered remains of an ancient wall, or perhaps just another megalithic circle among the many that dot the world. But the site, popularly known as Adam's Calendar, is more than just a collection of old rocks. It is a mystery buried in time, a message carved in stone that, according to some researchers, not only challenges the official timelines of human history, but could be one of the oldest sites ever constructed by intelligent hands. The discovery, at least in modern terms, dates back to 2003, when pilot and explorer Michael Tellinger, together with researcher Johann Heine, began studying a circular stone formation on top of a hill in a remote and difficult-to-access area. What initially caught their attention was the almost perfect arrangement of the stones, many of which were precisely aligned with key astronomical points, solstices, equinoxes, and celestial events that would have required advanced knowledge of the movement of celestial bodies. The stones, it seems, were not there by chance. They had been placed with clear intent, following patterns of solar and lunar alignment that suggested a ritual or functional use linked to time. But the truly puzzling aspect emerged when indirect dating methods were applied, based on erosion, the astronomical cycles indicated by the formation, and the estimated age of the surrounding terrain. According to these estimates, Adam's calendar could be between 75,000 and 200,000 years old. If this figure is accurate, it would make the site the oldest megalithic complex on the planet, predating Stonehenge by tens of thousands of years, and even earlier than the accepted dates for the emergence of human civilization as we know it. If these calculations are correct, then the site would have been built by archaic humans, or perhaps by something else. The name Adam's Calendar was given based on the suggestion that this could have been a starting point, a time marker used by early humans. not only to track the cycles of the sun and moon, but as a kind of sacred clock, capable of measuring seasons, eclipses, and other celestial phenomena with an accuracy we today associate with ancient and advanced cultures. But this structure, isolated in the African savanna, with no obvious traces of cities or temples nearby, raises a deep contradiction. How could a supposedly primitive culture conceive and build an observatory of such complexity, at a time when humans were still struggling to survive through hunting and gathering? The stones are mostly composed of dolerite, a very hard rock that is not easy to work or move without proper tools. Some of them have carved shapes that suggest intentionality, grooves, marks, channels that could have been used to cast shadows or reflect light at key times of the year. From the center of the main circle, an upright stone known as the calendar stone marks the exact point where the sun rises at the spring equinox. This type of precision requires constant observation, systematic measurement, and astronomical knowledge that, according to the official academic view, did not develop until much later in Mesopotamia or Egypt. But what makes this finding even more provocative is the context in which it is found. Around Adam's calendar, scattered in the nearby hills, there are thousands of circular structures built with dry stone walls. Seen from the air, these ruins appear to form a network, a geometric pattern extending for hundreds of kilometers. For years, they were thought to be cattle enclosures or abandoned dwellings of nomadic tribes, but the number, distribution, and complexity of these structures suggest they were part of something much larger. Some estimate they could have housed tens of thousands of people, implying the existence of a structured, organized, and technically capable society, but completely unknown to official history. The fact that the South African region has been identified by modern genetics as one of the oldest cradles of Homo sapiens adds another layer to the mystery. According to fossil records and mitochondrial DNA analysis, the first humans would have emerged in this very area around 200,000 years ago. Is it possible that these early humans were capable of such precise architectural feats, even before leaving written records or elaborate ceramics? Or was there another humanity, earlier, with lost knowledge? Theories have multiplied. Some link the site with the legends of the Anunnaki, those enigmatic beings described in Sumerian texts who supposedly descended from the sky and gave knowledge to primitive humanity. Michael Tellinger, in particular, has defended the idea that Adam's calendar and the surrounding structures were part of a gold mining network controlled by non-human beings, possibly extraterrestrials, who used primitive humans as labor. This theory, while considered speculative by many, finds echoes in local myths, and the fact that the South African region is rich in gold deposits that were exploited in ancient times. Other hypotheses, less extravagant but equally provocative, suggest that Adam's calendar was the work of a completely human civilization, but whose memory was erased by the effects of time, natural disasters, and cultural oblivion. A civilization that perhaps never built empires or walled cities, but developed a deep understanding of the sky, the earth, and natural cycles. Perhaps a culture that did not need to leave grand monuments, because its work was meant to last where the common eye does not look. In the alignment of the stones, in the language of the sun, in the sacred geography of the landscape. Today, Adam's calendar remains an open site, exposed to the elements, without official protection or institutional recognition. Visitors who come there do so more out of curiosity than archaeological guidance. Yet those who have been inside the circle claim that something different is felt. It is not just the landscape or the silence. There is a faint vibration, an echo in the stone, as if the memory of the site still beats beneath the surface, as if the stones remember. The mystery of Adam's calendar is not only in its age, function, or precision. It lies in what it suggests, that human history is much older, richer, and more complex than we have allowed ourselves to accept. That on the edges of official time, where archaeology has yet to look deeply, there are traces of knowledge waiting to be understood, not as an isolated fact, but as part of a broader story. And perhaps among the stones of this forgotten calendar, the voice of those who built it still resonates, marking not only the time of days, but also the cycles of humanity. The elongated skulls of Paracas. Along the arid southern coast of Peru, on a peninsula that juts into the Pacific like an ancient tongue of land, the wind drags the dust of centuries and occasionally reveals fragments of a past that seems too distant to fully understand. In this region known as Paracas, famous for its textiles, pottery, and a pre-Inca history still shrouded in mystery, lies one of the most intriguing discoveries in South American archaeology. A series of human skulls with such pronounced elongation that, even today, they continue to provoke astonishment, debate, and countless interpretations that evade any definitive conclusion. The discovery was made in the 1920s by the Peruvian archaeologist Julio C. Tello, considered by many the father of Peruvian archaeology. During his excavations in a group of tombs in the desert area of Paracas, Tello found an underground necropolis where dozens of mummies rested, wrapped in extremely fine textiles and placed with a level of care and symbolism that revealed a highly ritualistic society. But what immediately captured attention were the skulls. Some displayed extreme cranial deformation, with a height that far exceeded the proportions of a modern human. The upper part of the skull was so elongated it seemed to defy anatomy itself, with a larger cranial capacity and an oval shape that, until that moment, had not been recorded with such intensity in any other known culture. For decades, the predominant explanation was the practice of intentional cranial deformation, a ritual custom documented in several cultures worldwide. From the ancient Mayans to African tribes, examples have been found where the skull of an infant is shaped using boards, bindings, or pressure devices, aiming to give it a form considered beautiful, sacred, or distinctive of an elite. In this sense, the Paracas skulls would be part of a symbolic cultural tradition, an identity mark passed down from generation to generation. However, over time, and with access to more advanced technologies, studies on these remains began to reveal elements that did not entirely fit that explanation. Some of the Paracas skulls not only showed unusual elongation, but also deeper structural differences. Absent or atypically fused cranial sutures, displaced occipital foramina, and brain volumes that in some cases exceeded the human average by more than 25%. These differences were not simple consequences of external modification, but seemed to indicate an anatomical variation of internal origin, possibly genetic. In recent years, mitochondrial DNA analyses have been conducted on several of these skulls, adding a new layer of uncertainty. Some preliminary results, although not yet validated by peer-reviewed studies, suggest that certain samples present genetic sequences incompatible with known indigenous South American populations. These findings have been interpreted in various ways. Some argue they could be migratory lineages from Eurasia in ancient times, while others, more inclined toward speculation, have hinted at the possibility that these individuals belonged to a completely different population, perhaps extinct, that coexisted with pre-Columbian peoples or even preceded them. Beyond the genetics, what truly fuels the mystery of the Paracas skulls is the symbolic and energetic atmosphere surrounding them. The funerary goods, the extraordinarily elaborate textiles accompanying the mummies, the ritual objects, and the underground construction suggest a deeply spiritual worldview. A culture that not only honored its dead, but prepared them for a passage requiring attention, solemnity, and wisdom. In this context, the shape of the skull was not just an aesthetic matter, but possibly a representation of status, connection with the gods, or even an attempt to physically replicate a spiritual condition. Some scholars of Andean symbolism have proposed that the cranial elongation could have been a way to emulate certain beings considered sacred or celestial. The legends that survive among the peoples of the Andes refer to entities coming from the stars, tall beings with large skulls and deep eyes, whose wisdom marked the dawn of humanity. Although this type of narrative is usually dismissed by official science, It is fascinating that such descriptions visually coincide, at least with the skulls discovered in Paracas. Could these ritual practices be the echo of an ancient contact? Or is it a coincidence we have cloaked in mystery due to our desire to find the extraordinary in the ancient? And yet, when the skulls are observed up close, in person, the feeling they generate is difficult to describe precisely. They do not provoke fear or superficial fascination, but rather a kind of uncomfortable respect, as if their mere presence challenges our mental categories. They have a silent dignity, as if they were not archaeological remains but witnesses still guarding a secret that cannot be extracted with scalpels or genetic tests. It is as if the bones retain something more than calcium and biological memory, a kind of energy that reminds us that the past is not closed and that there are still chapters to discover. The scientific community largely maintains a cautious stance. It continues to consider that, for the most part, the elongated skulls are the result of a known cultural practice that does not necessarily imply a different genetic component, and certainly that explanation may cover much of the phenomenon. However, the most extreme cases, those showing real anatomical anomalies difficult to achieve through cranial pressure techniques, continue to challenge that certainty. And there, in that narrow margin between the explainable and the unexplainable, the mystery flourishes. Today, some of these skulls can be seen in museums in Ica and Lima, while others remain in private collections or laboratories, where their structure and composition continue to be studied. Although tourism has made the Paracas area an attractive destination for its landscapes and archaeological remains, the enigma of the elongated skulls remains an underground line of attraction, an unresolved story growing among the echoes of desert winds and ancient dunes. Perhaps we will never know for sure who these individuals were. Maybe we will not be able to determine if their condition was the result of an aesthetic practice taken to the extreme, or if we are facing a biological vestige of a parallel humanity that disappeared, leaving no trace other than their bones. But as long as those skulls continue to exist, as long as their impossible shapes keep appearing in the archaeological record, the question that accompanies them will remain alive. What if our history, as we know it, is only part of a much deeper and forgotten narrative still waiting to be told by those who were different and perhaps older than ourselves? The Sajama lines and prehistoric geometry, high on the Bolivian altiplano, where the air is so thin that every breath becomes a conscious act and the sky seems closer to the earth than anywhere else on the planet, stretches a network of perfectly straight lines that, from the ground, are barely noticeable, but from the air reveal a pattern so vast, so precise, and so enigmatic that even today it is difficult to understand how they were drawn, by whom, or for what purpose. These are the Sajama lines, a geometric phenomenon of colossal proportions that, unintentionally, turns the Andean plains into a kind of cosmic board, a mandala engraved on the skin of the landscape that seems to be waiting for someone to read it. Unlike their more famous neighbors, the Nazca lines, the Sajama lines do not form recognizable figures, nor do they draw mythological animals or human silhouettes. They are also not traced over a small, defined area. The Sajama lines, and this is what makes them so extraordinary, cover an area of more than 22,000 square kilometers, connecting mountains, volcanoes, rock formations, lagoons, and sacred sites through a network of perfectly straight paths that intersect, branch off, and overlap with a logic that, to this day, no one has fully deciphered. These lines, visible only from the air or via satellite images, were rediscovered in the second half of the 20th century thanks to photographic analysis of the regions near Nevado Sajama, the highest point in Bolivia. What the cartographers began to see was baffling. Thousands of lines drawn on the ground, several meters wide and up to 20 kilometers long, without deviating a single degree, even crossing hills and slopes with a precision that defied all logic. Unlike normal paths which adapt to the terrain, wind, or avoid obstacles, The Sajama lines seem to ignore the topography, as if they had been projected from the air with an invisible ruler, regardless of the difficulty of the terrain. Archaeologists and anthropologists have tried to offer rational explanations. Some argue that these lines are ancient ceremonial trails, traced by indigenous communities to connect places of ritual importance, such as apachetas, cemeteries, and worship sites. From this perspective, walking along these lines would be a spiritual act, a kind of pilgrimage toward the sacred, and the perfection of their tracing would obey an aesthetic and symbolic intention rather than a practical function. This theory is supported by the Andean tradition of the Seque, a network of paths and alignments that radiated from the main temples and organized both physical and social space, dividing lands and clans. However, although this ritual interpretation is plausible, there are elements that continue to escape logic. The first is the scale. The number of lines far exceeds any other known ceremonial system. The second is the geometric accuracy. Despite presumably having been made with rudimentary tools, many of the lines maintain such a straight and continuous trace that it is difficult to imagine how they were aligned without the help of modern technology. And the third, perhaps the most disturbing, is the overall pattern that emerges when observing the whole from above. There is a harmony, an underlying symmetry that does not respond to a local necessity, but to a broader, almost abstract logic, as if the layout obeyed a geometric plan conceived beyond the immediate plane of the Earth. Some researchers have proposed that the Sajama lines are not simple paths, but part of a much older and more complex system, perhaps linked to astronomical observation, time measurement, or the energetic resonance of the territory. Hypotheses have been put forward relating the points connected by the lines to solar positions, lunar cycles, and even planetary alignments, opening the possibility that this network functioned as a kind of monumental calendar or celestial map engraved on the landscape. Although these ideas have not been accepted by traditional archaeology, they are difficult to completely dismiss given the magnitude and perfection of the phenomenon. Other theories, more speculative but equally fascinating, have suggested that the lines could be part of a terrestrial energy network, a kind of planetary grid in which certain points, what some call ley lines, concentrate subtle flows linked to geobiology, the natural vibration of the Earth, or even an energetic architecture that would have been understood by vanished cultures. From this viewpoint, the Sajama lines would be the material reflection of a profound knowledge of the relationship between humans, space, and the invisible forces of the world. It is significant that, to this day, these lines have not received the same media or scientific attention as other similar formations. They are there, stretching like ordered scars across the Altiplano, yet for many remain an open secret, an anomaly that seems not to fit completely into any interpretive model. Perhaps their remoteness, their vastness, or their silence has helped keep them on the sidelines, as if they were too large to be looked at closely. But for those who study them, or simply contemplate them from a satellite image, the Sajama lines awaken a feeling that goes beyond analysis, a mixture of awe, reverence, and bewilderment. There are no written records of their construction, nor local legends that speak precisely of their origin. What exists are oral traditions that speak of ancient paths, spirit trajectories, trails that must be traveled with respect. Some community members still use them as guides to reach remote places, without knowing exactly who traced them or when. For them, the lines do not need explanation. They have always been there, and their function is to serve. And yet, one cannot help but wonder what kind of mindset, what kind of worldview was capable of conceiving such a network. Was it a society that saw the Earth as a mirror of the sky? Or a culture that understood geometry not as a mathematical abstraction, but as a sacred tool to link the visible with the invisible? Who were the men and women who walked these lines for the first time? What were they seeking by following a path that did not deviate a single millimeter? Perhaps we will never have all the answers. Perhaps the true meaning of Sajama lies beyond the reach of the scientific method, hidden in the folds of ancient wisdom that left no manuals or codices, but geometry and stone. But what we do know is that the lines remain there, intact, resisting time, wind, and oblivion, as if patiently waiting for someone to understand them. As if even today, beneath the vastness of the highland sky, they continue to trace their invisible message toward those who dare to look with different eyes. Because in the end, Sajama is not just a place on the map. It is an idea. A reminder that there were cultures that saw the world with a clarity we still struggle to imagine, and that left their mark on the earth not to dominate it, but to align with something greater. And in that alignment, perhaps, lies the key to everything we have yet to understand: the Piri Reis map and the southern glaciers. In a forgotten room of an ancient Ottoman palace, hidden among dusty manuscripts and scrolls of parchment that had survived the passage of time, an object was discovered that, from the very first moment, puzzled historians, cartographers, and scientists alike. It was the year 1929 when a group of Turkish scholars, reviewing the archives of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, found what appeared to be a fragment of an old nautical map, drawn with exquisite precision and decorated with notes in Ottoman Turkish. That document, nearly half a millennium old, would become over time one of the most mysterious pieces of ancient cartography, the Piri Reis map. Attributed to the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis, this map, dated 1513, notably depicts the western coasts of Africa, the eastern coasts of South America, the Caribbean, and, what has captured the most attention of the modern world, a vast stretch of land at the southernmost tip that many have interpreted as an early representation of the Antarctic continent, but without ice. Here the true enigma begins. Because if what the map shows is indeed the coast of Antarctica, how could Piri Reis have portrayed it with such accuracy 300 years before the continent was officially discovered, and thousands of years after it had become covered by glaciers? Piri Reis himself clarifies in his notes that his map was not drawn exclusively from his own observations, but compiled from a series of ancient sources, some of which dated back to much earlier times, and even mentions maps of Greek and Phoenician origin, and one that, he says, belonged to Christopher Columbus. These claims, far from clarifying the matter, plunge it into a deeper level of uncertainty. If he was truly copying older sources, who were those earlier cartographers who knew lands still unknown to the rest of the world? Where did they obtain that information? The coasts drawn in the southern part of the map show geographic features that surprisingly match the subglacial topography of Antarctica, particularly the region of Queen Maud Land. What is curious is that these kinds of details cannot be observed today, as they remain hidden under several kilometers of ice. It was thanks to the use of modern technologies, such as ice-penetrating radar developed during 20th century scientific expeditions, that the existence of mountain ranges, bays, and coastal profiles were confirmed, which according to some studies correspond to those in the Piri Reis map. This has led some researchers to propose a hypothesis as provocative as it is unlikely, that the map was based on knowledge obtained when Antarctica was not yet covered in ice, that is, more than 6,000 years ago, or even longer. This idea, defended by authors like Charles Hapgood in his influential work, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, suggests that there was a civilization prior to recorded history, with cartographic and exploration capabilities far more advanced than is generally admitted today. Hapgood proposed that these cultures might have mapped the world with sophisticated instruments, perhaps even through aerial observations, and that their knowledge was inherited or partially recovered by Renaissance sailors, who did not fully understand the extent of what they were copying. Albert Einstein supported Hapgood's ideas at one point, at least regarding the possibility that the shifting of the Earth's crust, caused by a polar mass imbalance, could have drastically changed the position of certain continents in a remote past. This geophysical hypothesis, although not universally accepted, at least provided a possible framework to imagine that regions like Antarctica once had a temperate climate, capable of sustaining human life, and thus could have been explored and recorded by a forgotten civilization. However, traditional archaeology and academic historiography have remained skeptical of this view. Most specialists argue that what appears on the map might be a misinterpretation of the coast of South America, projected erroneously southwards, perhaps due to a lack of precise knowledge about longitudinal distances. It has also been said that the similarities to Antarctica are exaggerated, or a product of cartographic pareidolia, a kind of illusion where the eye sees coincidences that do not actually exist. Still, the technical quality of the map remains difficult to ignore. The way the coasts are outlined, the proportion between continents, and the precision with which regions known at the time, such as Northern Africa and the Eastern Atlantic, are represented, reveal a mastery of navigation and geography that does not fully correspond with the nautical knowledge of the 16th century. The projection used by Reis, according to some experts, implies an advanced understanding of the Earth's curvature, something that officially only began to be developed centuries later with Mercator's cartographic projections. Besides the geographic component, the map possesses a symbolic and stylistic richness that also deserves attention. The sea creatures that adorn it, the handwritten notes accompanying certain regions, and the inclusion of unknown or fantastic islands speak of a world where science, mythology, and rumor coexisted in balance. But they also indicate that its authors worked with sources of very diverse origin, some of which, according to suspicions, might have been available in ancient libraries now lost, such as the legendary Library of Alexandria, or in private archives maintained by navigation schools unknown to official history. As more ancient maps have been discovered, like that of Oronce Finet or the 15th century Portuguese Portolans, a web of evidence has begun to be woven which, when analyzed together, suggests that certain areas of the planet were known, although not conquered, much earlier than we imagine. The case of the Reis map, due to its level of detail and its connection to a continent still unexplored at the time, remains the most representative of this mystery. And so, between the fine lines drawn on gazelle skin and the enigmatic references to southern lands covered in green, the map continues to challenge the limits of what is explainable. It is not a simple navigation piece, but an open question that history has yet to answer. Who were those ancient cartographers who knew the geography of a glacial world before the ice claimed it forever? How did they record that information? And how did it reach the Ottoman admiral's hands so many centuries later? Perhaps we will never know. Or maybe, in some dark corner of another forgotten archive, an older, clearer, more revealing map still sleeps. Until then, the Reis map will remain what it has been since the day it was found. A paper echo of something larger, older, more unsettling. A relic of knowledge once global, and now barely glimpsed through the torn edges of a cartography that should not exist, but does. The Magnetic Anomaly of the Longyu Caves. In Zhejiang Province, in eastern China, there exists a mystery that history, archaeology, and logic have yet to solve. It is not an isolated artifact, nor an enigmatic inscription, but a gigantic network of artificial caves carved into solid rock with such precision, effort, and mystery that since their discovery, they have raised more questions than answers. They are known as the Longyu Caves, and what lies beneath the surface of that quiet rural region is something that challenges not only the official chronology of Chinese civilizations, but also our understanding of what an ancient culture could achieve, and why. The discovery was almost accidental. In the summer of 1992, a villager named Wu Anai, driven by curiosity and rumors of small bottomless ponds, decided to pump the water out of one of them, in an improvised effort and without great expectations. The pond, surrounded by vegetation and seemingly natural, began to empty, and what emerged after hours of draining was unexpected. A vast underground space carved with incredible symmetry, perfectly smooth walls, pillars sculpted from living rock, and a series of repeated marks that appeared to have been made with organized and methodical tools. Wu and his neighbors continued exploring other similar depressions nearby, and within a few weeks, they had discovered more than 20 artificial caves, all hidden underwater and all built with a baffling geometric logic. Each of these caves measures approximately 30 meters deep, and many exceed 1,000 square meters in surface area. What is most puzzling is that all were carved into sandstone, a type of material extremely difficult to work with primitive tools, and there are no visible traces of the debris that should have been generated by removing such a volume of stone. The most conservative estimates calculate that at least 1 million cubic meters of rock would have needed to be removed, implying a massive, organized human effort sustained for decades, or perhaps centuries, with no reference in historical texts. Chinese civilization, meticulous in its records, offers not a single line about the construction of the Longyu Caves. No emperor mentions them, no ancient chronicler describes them, and no local oral tradition seems to remember the process. It is as if they had been excavated by a completely unknown civilization, or as if it were a project so secretive that it was deliberately erased from history. But beyond the amazement generated by their mere existence, there is an even more disturbing detail that has come to light recently. A magnetic anomaly that alters the behavior of compasses and electronic devices inside them. Researchers who have studied the site, both locally and internationally, have reported unexplained disturbances in the magnetic fields within certain chambers of the caves. Compasses slowly spin, measuring devices become uncalibrated, and in some cases, sudden peaks of electromagnetic radiation have been reported without an apparent source. This phenomenon, although not present in all caves, does seem to repeat in specific patterns, as if certain areas were designed to manipulate or contain energy. The theories about it range from geological to esoteric. Some geophysicists have suggested that the irregularities could be due to concentrations of metallic minerals in the rock or natural magnetic veins. However, these explanations weaken upon noticing that outside the caves, even just a few meters away, the same effects are not recorded, suggesting that the alteration does not come from the terrain, but from the design of the chambers themselves. In other words, the shape, orientation, or internal arrangement of the caves could be generating a magnetic resonance phenomenon not yet understood. This possibility has opened the way for much bolder hypotheses. Some researchers, including architects and engineers specializing in acoustics, have pointed out that the marks on the inner walls seem to follow a logic of repetitive patterns that could have served as modulators of sound or vibration. There are zones within the caves where the reverberation is so precise that a soft whisper can be heard clearly several meters away, as if the entire design had been conceived to enhance certain frequencies. This has led to the idea that the caves might have been used as meditation chambers, ritual spaces, or even places to manipulate sound or vibrational energy. The lack of human remains, tools, inscriptions, or direct cultural artifacts inside the caves further complicates their interpretation. There is no evidence that they were used as dwellings, tombs, or storage spaces. Nor have paintings or symbols been found that indicate a religious function, at least not in terms we know. They are empty, disconcertingly empty, and yet perfectly constructed, with an effort that would only make sense if something beyond the functional was sought, a form of resonance, control, or connection with something invisible. Those who defend alternative hypotheses have proposed that the caves might have been part of a terrestrial energy network, or that they were built as sanctuaries of civilizations technologically more advanced than ours, but whose legacy has vanished, leaving no trace other than these underground structures. Some go further and suggest that the magnetic anomalies could be the consequence of devices still active underground, protected by rock layers, or even by technology we do not understand, and that has remained dormant for millennia. Of course, these ideas are far from having the support of scientific consensus. But even within the bounds of traditional archaeology, Longyu remains a monumental enigma, Its absence from historical records, its scale, architectural perfection, and the magnetic anomaly detected inside form a picture that does not fit any known narrative. No one knows when they were built. No one knows who made them. And no one, so far, has been able to answer why. The truth is that the caves remain there, open to the public, visited by thousands of people every year, yet still undeciphered. Those who walk through them in silence describe a strange sensation, a weight in the atmosphere, a slight vibration in the ears, an echo that does not entirely respond to the laws of physics. Some claim that the caves feel, that there is a latent intelligence in their form, an intention buried beneath centuries of rock and mystery. And although it may seem exaggerated, it is hard not to leave with a question deeply engraved. What if there are still places on Earth not built to be understood, but to be felt? The mystery of Longyou remains, as intact as its walls, as unfathomable as the shadows cast by light when it is lost inside. And every magnetic anomaly, every needle deviation, every perfect silence between its walls, is a reminder that our past is much vaster than we believe, and that perhaps, in some corner beneath our feet, truths still await us that we have not even learned to formulate. The theory of the great forgetting. Imagine for a moment that everything we believe we know about the origins of human civilization is incomplete, that the fundamental pieces of the puzzle have been lost, not by accident, but by a series of events that, over millennia, deliberately erased, or allowed to be erased, a critical part of our collective history. This is the idea behind the so-called theory of the great forgetting, a disturbing hypothesis suggesting that humanity has suffered one or more radical breaks in its historical memory, so profound that the remnants of entire civilizations may have been buried beneath silence, ruin, and time, and that what we understand today as the beginning of our history is nothing more than a restart after a great loss. This theory does not arise from the whim of a few alternative authors, but has gained strength as new archaeological discoveries seem not to fit the accepted chronology. Monuments that defy the tools available in their era, maps showing unknown lands with inexplicable precision, megalithic structures whose construction dates precede the invention of writing, and oral traditions that insist on recalling catastrophes of planetary scale, as if the memory of something colossal had been fragmented into myths and legends. The concept of a great forgetting is based on a disturbing premise: that humanity has not followed a linear progression from caves to the modern era, but has experienced cycles of rise and collapse, of splendor and amnesia, so vast in time that traces of the ancient have faded to the point of becoming legends. Some theories go even further, proposing that before our known era there existed civilizations with knowledge that could rival, or even surpass, our own, and that the loss of that knowledge was not only a consequence of time, but the result of catastrophic events that forced the survivors to start over, without memory. The cataclysm is a recurring element in these interpretations. Whether through global floods, volcanic eruptions, cosmic impacts, or abrupt climate changes, many myths of the ancient world, from the biblical flood to the disappearance of Atlantis in Plato's accounts, including indigenous legends from the Americas and the Vedic texts of India, speak of an era before ours in which powerful, wise, and developed peoples existed, who were wiped out by a destructive force on a planetary scale. The few who survived, according to these narratives, preserved fragments of that ancestral knowledge and passed it on as best they could, through stories, symbols, and rituals, until it too was lost or misunderstood by later generations. This narrative, which sounds like fantasy or speculative fiction to many, takes on another dimension when intertwined with physical evidence that is difficult to explain within the traditional paradigm. Sites such as Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, with ceremonial stone structures more than 12,000 years old, or the submerged ruins off the coast of Japan at Yonaguni, which appear to have been eroded underwater when the last ice age had not yet ended, are just some examples pointing toward a much older and forgotten history of humanity. There is also the matter of impossible technologies. The perfectly cut stones of Pumapunku in Bolivia, with right angles and perforations that seem to have been made with high-precision tools. The buried hydraulic systems of Teotihuacan, still not fully understood. And the elongated skulls of Paracas, showing anatomical features difficult to attribute to simple artificial deformation. All these elements, although not proving on their own the existence of a lost civilization, invite reconsideration of whether we have truly seen everything, or if we are still walking on a superficial layer of a much deeper history. Supporters of the theory of the Great Forgetting propose that if we had gone through a global devastating event, such as a comet impact or a sudden shift in the Earth's axis, the survivors would have been reduced to primitive conditions, unable to preserve their technology or social structures, forced to focus on mere survival. Over time, complex knowledge would have faded, and the rebuilding of civilization would have started from zero. The few memories that remained, passed down orally, would have ended up reinterpreted as myths, legends of ancient gods, giant builders, sunken cities, or palaces in the sky. But then the inevitable question arises: how can a loss be proven? How do you demonstrate what, by definition, has been erased? That is precisely the paradox that surrounds this theory. It is not a narrative with conclusive evidence, but a set of patterns, gaps, contradictions, and anomalous details that, when viewed together, seem to point to a partial, edited, broken history. And that is where its power lies, not in what it openly states, but in what it forces us to question. Many alternative researchers such as Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, and Robert Schoch have promoted this vision, suggesting that human history must be rewritten considering the devastating effects of global catastrophic events, especially those occurring around 10,500 years before the present, when multiple geological evidences point to a series of cometary impacts that may have triggered an era of massive destruction. These impacts would have melted ice layers, caused planetary tsunamis, and darkened the sky with dust, leading to the extinction of entire cultures, leaving little more than blurred ruins. And the most disturbing part is that if this hypothesis were correct, we would not be at the end of a long evolution, but at the beginning of a new repetition. Our civilization, so proud of its technology and exploratory capacity, might not be the first, nor even the most advanced, but simply the most recent. Perhaps the fragments of wisdom we have inherited in ancient texts, in rock art, in astronomical symbols, are only the pale shadow of a much vaster knowledge that once illuminated the world, and that, for some reason, was deliberately forgotten, buried by the earth or by fear. Because if anything becomes clear when contemplating this theory, it is that forgetting is not always accidental. Sometimes forgetting is a way to protect oneself. Sometimes what was lost was not due to neglect, but because remembering would have been unbearable. Perhaps there were those who chose not to rebuild what was lost, but to start from zero, without gods, without cities, without memory. Perhaps that is our true heritage, an interrupted history, a page torn from the book of centuries, a warning written in stone, but in a language we no longer understand. The theory of the Great Forgetting does not seek to provide definitive answers. Rather, it proposes a different way of looking at the gaps between the chapters of history. It invites us to wonder what lies in the shadow zones, in poorly closed chronologies, in the silences of ancient texts, and in the eyes of eroded statues. It reminds us that memory is not eternal, and that even the greatest civilizations can disappear without leaving more trace than an echo in stone, an anomaly on a map, or a whispered legend in the night. And in that whisper, in that void full of possibilities, perhaps the truth is waiting for us. A truth we once knew and then forgot. the submerged Moai of Easter Island. In the midst of the vast and lonely Pacific Ocean, like a whisper lost in the blue immensity, Easter Island emerges, also known by its native name, Rapa Nui. This island, isolated from everything and everyone, is one of the most enigmatic places on the planet, not only because of its remote location or the complexity of its oral history, but because of the indelible traces of a past that seems to have been written in stone and then covered by oblivion. And at the heart of this mystery, rising with its unshakable basalt gaze, are the Moai, those colossal figures that for centuries have defied time, weather, and logic. However, beyond the Moai that we see standing on ceremonial platforms, the famous Ahu, or those half buried on the slopes of the Rano Raraku volcano, there is a rumor that has circulated for decades among archaeologists, local fishermen, divers, and independent researchers. The existence of Moai submerged under the waters surrounding the island, figures that may have been swallowed by the ocean after some catastrophic event, or by a gradual rise in sea level that slowly covered them, burying under the waves an even deeper fragment of Rapa Nui's mystery. The origin of these stories is not recent. Since the early 20th century, travelers and adventurers visiting the island spoke of structures visible in certain areas of the seabed, particularly to the south and west of the island. Some claim to have seen figures similar to the Moai among the corals, half buried in volcanic sand, covered with algae and petrified coral. Others mentioned perfectly carved blocks, arranged in what seemed to be a kind of submerged platform or wall, whose dimensions could not be attributed to chance. Over time, these accounts gained credibility. In the 1950s, the French explorer Jacques Cousteau visited Rapa Nui and conducted a series of dives in the surrounding waters. Although he did not officially document the existence of submerged Moai, he did record finding rock formations that, due to their shape, texture, and arrangement, suggested the presence of artificial structures beneath the sea. Years later, independent researchers like David Childress and other promoters of unconventional archaeology revisited the topic, gathering testimonies from local divers who spoke of fallen statues in shallow waters near places such as the vicinity of Motumotirohiva, a small rocky islet barely visible in the distance. The idea of submerged Moai is not entirely absurd if one considers that much of the Pacific has been affected by tectonic events, volcanic eruptions, and land shifts that can radically alter the topography of an island within hours. Rapa Nui itself lies on a geologically active plate, and studies have revealed that its current form is the result of the merging of 3 underwater volcanoes that emerged at different times in its history. It would not be unreasonable to think that parts of the island now submerged were once above sea level, and that moai, or ritual constructions similar to those on land, were also erected in those areas. Supporters of this hypothesis also point out that many of the moai remaining on the surface show evidence of having been moved from higher places to the coast, and that some, due to their extreme locations, suggest a planning that extended beyond the island's current boundaries. The idea of a larger Rapa Nui, partially submerged by geological processes or by a sudden rise in sea level, is consistent with geological evidence showing that, at the end of the last ice age, the planet's waters rose significantly, flooding coastal lands and hiding structures of civilizations that lived close to the shore. Another line of research focuses on the ecological collapse the island suffered, a dramatic episode that caused total deforestation of the territory and a social collapse that deeply transformed Rapa Nui culture. During that crisis period, many statues were abandoned, toppled, or reused. It is possible that some were dragged by landslides into the sea, particularly during violent storms or earthquakes, which could explain the presence of submerged figures without needing to assume a total sinking of part of the island. Still, some propose an even bolder view. According to certain theories, the submerged moai would be part of a much broader ritual network linked to star observation, open sea navigation, and ancestor worship, deeply rooted in the Rapa Nui worldview. In this sense, the submerged statues would not be the result of an accident, but a deliberate part of the island's spiritual design, a way to extend its influence into the sea, where the spirits of ancestors could navigate eternally. Official archaeology, for its part, has been cautious about these ideas. Although it acknowledges the possibility that some Moai ended up underwater due to natural phenomena, there are, to date, no formal and published studies rigorously documenting the existence of fully submerged statues in an upright position. Underwater explorations have been few, with limited budgets and mostly anecdotal. This has caused the topic to remain in a kind of limbo between rumor and science, a gray area where the mystery grows with each unconfirmed account. However, in recent years, thanks to underwater scanning technology, new initiatives have begun to explore the seabed around Rapa Nui in greater detail. The images obtained so far show rock structures that deserve deeper investigation, although it is still too early to say with certainty whether they are Moai, architectural fragments, or simply unusual geological formations. What does seem increasingly clear is that the island holds secrets beyond its surface, and its story has yet to be fully told. Rapa Nui has always been a symbol of cultural resistance, ancestral memory, and contact with the inexplicable. Its people, myths, and monuments have survived centuries of isolation, colonization, and oblivion. In this context, the submerged Moai represent more than an archaeological curiosity. They express a mystery that seems to stretch from the ocean's depths to the core of human identity, the desire to remember what water, time, or history have tried to erase. If one day the existence of these underwater Moai is confirmed, perhaps we will have to rethink not only the chronology of Rapa Nui culture, but also the very notion of what we understand by lost civilization. Because a sunken statue is not just a carved rock, it is a message, a petrified gaze that continues watching from the ocean floor, waiting perhaps for someone to rediscover it and understand. The giants of Lovelock Valley. Sometimes the desert dust holds secrets that even the wind dares not whisper. In the arid and silent north of the state of Nevada, United States, stretches a relentless landscape of eroded hills and sun-scorched plains. There, amid the solitude of Lovelock Valley, stands a cave that, at first glance, seems nothing special. An opening in the rock, like so many others scattered across the American West. However, upon entering its darkness, one begins to feel something different, something ancient, something that seems to whisper from the walls. Because it was there, according to an ancient legend and an even more controversial discovery, that enormous beings lived and died, the supposed red-haired giants of Lovelock. The story begins with the Paiute, a native tribe of the area that for generations told a story as fascinating as it was disturbing. According to their oral tradition, long before Europeans arrived, the Paiute ancestors waged a prolonged and bloody war against a race of cannibal giants they called Si-Te-Ka. These beings, described as huge, fair-skinned, and red-haired, were brutal, cunning, and above all, ruthless. The accounts speak of epic battles, relentless pursuits, and a final confrontation where the giants were cornered by the Paiute warriors inside a large cave, which was then set on fire to exterminate their enemies once and for all. For a long time, this story was considered a mere tribal myth, an allegory of past conflicts transformed into fantastic epic. But in the early 20th century, something happened that made more than one person wonder if beneath that legend there was a truth buried, literally, under layers of earth, ash, and oblivion. In 1911, while extracting guano from the Lovelock Cave, a natural fertilizer formed by bat droppings accumulated over centuries, workers stumbled upon remains that sparked enormous archaeological interest. Stone tools, human remains, perfectly preserved baskets, sandals, animal bones, and even artifacts that seemed to indicate a more complex technical knowledge than expected. The University of California and the Nevada Museum sent teams of archaeologists, and the excavations soon revealed an even stranger finding. Human bones of unusual proportions, including fragments of skulls and femurs that appear to belong to colossal individuals. Some sources mention complete skeletons measuring between 2.5 and almost 3 meters tall, which would have been impossible to believe if not for the fact that several researchers, including miners and archaeologists, documented their discoveries in writing. One of the most cited accounts mentions the appearance of a skull so large that an average person could comfortably place a helmet inside it as if it were a bowl. Reddish hair was also found, perfectly preserved by the cave's dryness, which immediately linked the discoveries with the Paiute accounts of the red-haired giants. The scientific community, however, reacted with skepticism. Most of the remains were classified as belonging to very tall individuals, yes, but within the maximum possible range for normal humans. The most extreme remains, curiously, disappeared over time. Some were sent to museums and laboratories and, according to certain independent researchers, were never properly returned or documented. Other pieces were simply lost, and today only blurry photographs and written testimonies survive, which have been the subject of intense debate between those who support the truth of the find and those who claim everything has been magnified by collective imagination. The truth is that even if the existence of giants in the most fantastic sense of the term is dismissed, the archaeological findings at Lovelock remain highly peculiar. Some of the objects found, such as enormous woven fiber sandals, almost 1/2 meter long, or the complexly designed baskets, indicate the presence of an advanced culture and manufacturing techniques, different from the indigenous groups known in the area. Additionally, there are remains of extinct fauna, like the big-faced duck and other species that disappeared over 8,000 years ago, suggesting that human occupation of the cave is much older than initially thought. Over the years, the legend has grown. Today, many alternative researchers have taken up the Lovelock story as proof that Earth may have once been inhabited in the distant past by human or humanoid races of superior physical dimensions, possibly survivors of previous cataclysms, or even descendants of lineages parallel to ours. Some even propose links to traditions of giants on other continents, such as the biblical Nephilim, the Greek Titans, or the Jotnar of Norse mythology, arguing that these universal legends could be cultural echoes of the same ancestral memory, a time when colossal creatures walked among humans. But beyond the extravagant theories and catchy headlines, one question remains unanswered. Why do so many different cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, remember having fought or coexisted with giants? Is it a repeated metaphor, a common psychological archetype, or is there something buried, literally or symbolically, that we have chosen not to see? In the case of Lovelock Valley, the cave can still be visited. Its walls do not speak, but their silence carries a particular weight, as if they knew more than they let on. Those who have explored it describe a strange sensation, as if the air inside were different, denser. Some areas seem to emit a dull resonance, and there are corners where the light behaves with an unsettling oddity. Even without resorting to the supernatural, the place has an energy that does not go unnoticed. Meanwhile, the official archaeological records continue to leave the debate open. Most of the bones have disappeared, old reports are scattered, and many contradictory testimonies have made the Lovelock case fertile ground for speculation. However, the essential remains: a legend passed down by the Paiute elders, a set of findings that clash with the official narrative, and a cave that still holds unanswered questions. Perhaps we will never know for sure who the original inhabitants of Lovelock were. Maybe they were just tall humans, members of a forgotten tribe, or maybe something more. But what is clear is that the story, the true one, the one not always printed in books, remains hidden in places like this. Cracks in the desert, where echoes of the past whisper uncomfortable truths, waiting for someone to listen and dare to remember. The Tayo's Cave and the Underground Legacy. Deep within the Ecuadorian jungle, where the vegetation twists like a living labyrinth, and the rivers seem to follow routes forgotten by time, lies one of the most enigmatic natural structures on the South American continent. To speak of the Tayos Cave is to enter a mystery as dense as the earth that covers it, a place where shadows hide not only stone and darkness, but also unanswered questions, out-of-place artifacts, and a legacy that could completely change the known history of humanity. The entrance to this cave is located in the province of Morona Santiago, in the Ecuadorian Amazon, within the territory of the Shuar indigenous community. They have lived alongside that abyss for generations. And although many prefer to keep their distance, the legends passed down by their elders speak of ancient entities, beings who emerged from the underground tunnels and deposited sacred objects there, made of shining metal, which no man was allowed to touch. According to the stories, those who dared to desecrate that place were cursed with relentless misfortune. For the Shuar, the cave is more than a geological formation. It is a heritage from ancient gods, a direct connection to what once was, and to what must not awaken. But what turned the Tayos Cave into a true magnet for explorers and scholars was not only the indigenous accounts, but the figure of a man who, with tenacity and controversy, managed to draw the world's attention to that forgotten point on the map. Juan Morix, an Argentine of Hungarian origin, who in 1969 claimed to have discovered, deep inside the cave, a metallic archive of non-human origin. According to his testimony, hidden in perfectly carved chambers, with symmetrical ceilings, straight columns, and tunnels that seemed to have been polished with advanced tools, he found plates engraved with unknown symbols, zoomorphic statues, maps of lost continents, and a library made entirely of sheets of shining metal. Moritz, aware of what such a claim implied, legally registered his discovery at the first notary office of Guayaquil. This act attracted the attention of unexpected circles, including a young Swiss researcher who was then beginning to shake the world with his theories about ancient astronauts, Erich von Däniken. In his book The Gold of the Gods, Däniken presented Moritz's version as proof of contact between ancient civilizations and beings from other worlds, a technological heritage that had survived hidden for millennia within the bowels of the earth. Although many discredited Moritz's story, labeling it sensationalism, one event elevated the mystery to another level. In 1976, one of the largest expeditions in Ecuador's history was organized. More than 100 people, including scientists, military personnel, speleologists, archaeologists, and even an astronaut from the Apollo program, Neil Armstrong, entered the Tayos Cave with the goal of verifying the truth of the claims. The expedition, partially sponsored by the Ecuadorian government and the Royal Geographical Society of the United Kingdom, managed to map an extensive network of tunnels, some of whose walls appeared to have truly been shaped with unusual precision. Natural chambers of great height, regular platforms, and galleries that gave the impression of having been carved rather than formed by natural processes were found. However, no metallic archive, statues, or impossible libraries were reported. The matter was left shrouded in doubt. Had Moritz lied, or had the expedition deliberately omitted certain discoveries? What is most unsettling, however, is not what was said, but what was never revealed. Some members of the expedition declared years later that they were not allowed access to all areas of the cave. Others said they were constantly escorted by members of the Ecuadorian army. Internal reports disappeared, and contradictory statements only fueled suspicions. And of course, there was the enigma of Neil Armstrong. What interest could the first man to walk on the moon have in venturing into a remote South American cave with real physical risk, months after his historic lunar walk? To this day, the mystery remains. The Tayos Cave exists. Its entrance, vertical and more than 70 meters deep, requires a careful descent among slippery rocks and perpetual humidity. Its interior is a world of infinite echoes, where the flashlight barely manages to overcome the darkness that envelops everything. Some sections have shapes so straight and angles so sharp that it would be difficult to attribute them to mere whims of nature. The galleries connect on different levels, some still unexplored. The place is immense and far from being fully mapped. The Shuar continue to consider it a sacred site. They do not allow strangers to enter without authorization. For them, it is part of their ancestors' legacy, a vestige from the time of the luminous beings, whose memory fades in the jungle, but whose presence is still felt, they say, when the wind changes direction without warning, or when bats disappear for no reason. The theories surrounding the Taos cave are as many as the tunnels inside it. Some speak of an underground civilization that took refuge there after a global cataclysm. Others suggest it is a hidden base, connected with other similar caves in South America, forming a network of ancient knowledge. Some claim there are records linking Taos with the mysterious tunnels of Peru, the secret archives of the Vatican, and even lost cities mentioned in ancient Sumerian texts. However, beyond the boldest hypotheses, the truth is that there is something deeply puzzling about this place. Something that does not quite fit with what we have been told about the architectural capabilities of ancient Amazonian cultures. Something that forces us to accept the possibility that beneath our feet exist traces of a previous, different, more advanced humanity, whose story has not been told because no one has wanted or been able to write it. Perhaps Moritz did not lie. Perhaps he said too much. Perhaps the metallic library still waits in an unexplored gallery, protected by layers of stone and time, awaiting someone to return, not to exploit its secrets, but to understand them. Because if the Taos cave teaches anything, it is that great mysteries do not need artificial lights or spectacular cameras to feel real. A crack in the earth, the echo of an ancient silence, and the persistent suspicion that beneath our feet rests the memory of a world that was lost, or that should never have been remembered. The mystery of the unknown DNA. In the most advanced laboratories in the world, where technology has penetrated the most intimate levels of life, secrets are being revealed that, although invisible to the human eye, could radically change our understanding of the past. The genome, that code which holds the history of every living being, began as a strictly scientific field of study. But over time, its implications have become increasingly profound, philosophical, and, in some cases, disturbing. Because there is something that has unsettled geneticists for decades. The existence of DNA fragments that do not match any known form of life. Sequences that seem to arise from an alternative history of humanity. A biological legacy that no one expected to find, and yet is there, latent, hidden in our cells like a whisper from times that perhaps were never recorded by official history. The first clues appeared in the 1990s, when advances in human genome sequencing began to accelerate with the help of more sophisticated computational tools. When studying fragments of mitochondrial DNA and nuclear DNA, scientists started noticing something strange. Some sequences did not match any modern population, nor the known lineages of Neanderthals or Denisovans. In other words, within the genetic structure of certain current humans, especially in regions of Africa and Asia, there were traces of a code that could not be explained through interbreeding with previously identified species. At first, it was thought to be technical errors, laboratory artifacts, or simple contamination. But after more thorough review, many of these fragments turned out to be consistent, repeatable, and surprisingly ancient. What is even more puzzling is that some of these fragments show mutations so unique that they seem to belong to a lineage completely different from any known hominid. In strictly evolutionary terms, this would imply the existence of a human, or humanoid, species that has not been recorded in the fossil record, but that left an indelible mark on the genetic code of our species. Scientists began referring to this mystery as ghost DNA. The name is fitting because it refers to something that cannot be seen, yet whose presence manifests unmistakably. It is as if an entire civilization had existed and disappeared without leaving visible remains, except for the genetic vestiges that still live within us. In regions such as Papua New Guinea, Australia, Tibet, and certain areas of sub-Saharan Africa, levels of this unknown DNA are higher, which has led to theories about ancient contacts between anatomically modern humans and archaic populations, of which we do not have a single documented bone. The idea that other human species existed with whom we coexisted, competed, and even interbred is no longer a marginal theory. Today we know that Neanderthals and Denisovans shared territory with Homo sapiens, and their genes live on in us. However, this extra DNA, the one that does not fit any category, cannot be attributed to any of those groups. Its origin remains a mystery, and some experts already speak of a fourth human ancestor, a completely unknown species that would have coexisted with us tens or even hundreds of thousands of years ago. One of the most perplexing studies was published by Harvard University in collaboration with European geneticists. There, samples from indigenous populations of Melanesia were analyzed, and a surprisingly high percentage of unidentified DNA was found that did not match any existing genetic database. What is unsettling is that these sequences do not appear randomly. They have complex patterns, code functional proteins, and seem to have been present for at least 80,000 years, ruling out recent mutations or isolated anomalies. While some researchers strive to find conventional explanations, such as undiscovered human lineages or prehistoric migrations, not yet traced archaeologically, others have begun to look beyond the traditional limits of science. Because if this DNA does not come from any known species on Earth, is it possible that it has an exogenous origin? Could it be genetic material introduced by a superior intelligence at some point in the distant past? Although this idea sounds like something out of a science fiction novel, quite a few geneticists have at least hypothetically considered the possibility of external intervention in the development of Homo sapiens. In 2013, a study published in the journal Icarus, a scientific publication dedicated to astronomy, proposed the hypothesis that certain viruses carrying genetic material could have been deliberately manipulated to alter the human genome in its earliest stages. If that were true, we would not simply be talking about natural evolution, but about a kind of genetic engineering applied tens of thousands of years ago. Of course, these ideas remain highly speculative and far from scientific consensus, but their very existence reflects the level of perplexity this phenomenon generates. How is it possible that parts of our genetic code are literally inexplicable? And why do these sequences remain functional, integrated into the very core of our DNA, instead of having degraded like other mutations do? In the last decade, with the development of techniques like CRISPR and high-precision genomic editing, scientists have been able to isolate some of these mysterious sequences and observe their behavior. What they found is not only perplexing but provocative. Some of these ghost genes seem to play a role in fundamental processes such as the formation of the cerebral cortex, emotional regulation, and complex cognitive abilities. That is to say, they could be directly related to what makes us human, or at least to what differentiates us from other species. This has led to reflections that are more philosophical than technical. If part of what we are comes from a source we do not know, what does it mean to be human? Where does natural evolution end and intervention begin, if there was any? And why are these sequences present in some populations and absent in others? Some alternative researchers, like the English biologist Rupert Sheldrake or the anthropologist Michael Cremo, have proposed that the history of humanity is much older and more complex than we currently accept. For them, the unknown DNA is not a statistical error or a local phenomenon, but evidence of a previous civilization that was erased by a cataclysm or by the passing of eras too long to be comprehended. A civilization that perhaps left no monuments, but did leave a silent mark on our own biological structure. And so, what began as a technical investigation in molecular genetics has gradually become a dark mirror where humanity contemplates itself with amazement. Because while we usually seek mystery in pyramids, impossible maps, or the deepest caves, perhaps one of the greatest enigmas lies right within us, spiraling in every cell, every heartbeat, every thought. The unknown DNA remains there, without a conclusive explanation, challenging scientists, intriguing seekers of the past, and perhaps whispering that we are not as unique as we believed, or that others came before us, and something of them still lives, buried deep within who we are. The city of the giant monkeys. Amid the dense vegetation in the heart of Honduras, where the jungle seems to whisper secrets that men have forgotten, there lies a myth that has endured for centuries. A legend whispered by indigenous peoples long before European explorers set foot on the continent. It speaks of a lost city, shrouded in the humidity and silence of the jungle, a metropolis of stone and greenery, as ancient as it is mysterious, known by a name as strange as it is unsettling: the White City, or as many prefer to call it today, the City of the Monkey God. For generations, the oral tradition of local communities described a place covered by jungle, where enormous structures lay buried, where stone figures with simian faces guarded the ruins of a vanished civilization. It was not simply a forgotten city. It was a sanctuary dedicated to an imposing creature, resembling a gigantic monkey, worshipped by the ancient inhabitants as if it were a god. Some said that this creature really existed, and that its legacy was imprinted in sculptures, engravings, and rituals. Others, more superstitious, warned that no one should seek it, that those who did would never return. For a long time, the story was dismissed as a jungle fable, just another exotic tale among the many attributed to lost civilizations. But something changed in recent years. At the beginning of the 2010s, a series of scientific and archaeological expeditions, supported by airborne laser mapping technology known as LiDAR, revealed something that made the whole world turn its attention to the impenetrable Mosquitia jungle in Honduras. What was discovered from the air was simply stunning: a pattern of hidden structures, perfectly aligned, with plazas, pyramids, canals, and roads laid out with mathematical precision. It was, without a doubt, a city. When the exploration team set foot on the ground, they did not find mere moss-covered stones. They found sculptures representing creatures never seen before, skulls carved with simian features, and figurines that appeared to be hybrid beings, humans with monkey characteristics. Some figures were adorned with ceremonial headdresses. Others showed sharp teeth and expressions of ritualized aggression. Everything seemed to indicate that, for that lost civilization, monkeys were not just animals of the environment. They were sacred symbols, perhaps divine entities, or even distant ancestors. And then the ancient tale resurfaced, that of the giant monkeys, an unknown species, similar to a gorilla but even more imposing, which would have inhabited the depths of the jungle in times immemorial. According to the chronicles of the 16th century conquistadors, Mesoamerican people spoke of these beings as guardians of the Forbidden City. They were described as bipedal beings with dark fur and enormous strength, who attacked intruders mercilessly. Some 19th century adventurers even claimed to have heard their roars deep in the jungle, although they were never able to prove it. The possibility that an unknown primate species, or some extinct variation of the Asian Gigantopithecus, had existed in Central America began to be considered by some alternative researchers. However, the scientific community, as expected, was skeptical. The Gigantopithecus, a real creature that lived in Asia hundreds of thousands of years ago, has never been recorded in America. And without fossil remains to support the existence of these giant monkeys in Honduras, rational explanations point to symbolic or ritual interpretations. The figures found, they argue, could represent deities, visual metaphors of animist beliefs, or simple personifications of jungle nature. But there are details that escape conventional logic. One of the original team archaeologists, Dr. Chris Fisher, mentioned that some structures found in the city were built with such precision and aligned with such specific astronomical patterns that it was difficult to understand how a completely isolated civilization, in such an inhospitable area, had developed such a level of sophistication without leaving clear traces of continuity in other parts of the region. Furthermore, the absence of typical elements from known cultures, like the Maya or the Olmecs, suggests that we are facing a completely different people, of whom we have no prior references. And that void, that break in archaeological continuity, opens the door to all uncomfortable questions. What happened to this civilization? Why did it disappear without a trace? What was their relationship with the apes? And why is there such a deeply rooted fear, even today, among the inhabitants near the area? Current stories still speak of strange lights among the trees, guttural sounds that do not belong to any known animal, and a strange energy that envelops the place. Some members of the exploration team even fell ill after their return, which gave rise to theories about curses, toxins, or artifacts that perhaps should never have been touched. Adding to this is an intriguing detail. Among the objects found were geometric symbols that do not match any documented pre-Columbian script. Some shapes resemble runic inscriptions, others Proto-Indo-European characters. This anomaly has led to speculation about transoceanic contacts prior to the colonial period, or even about older civilizations that moved across continents when maps were very different from those we know today. But perhaps the most puzzling thing of all is the silence. After the initial uproar, investigations into the city of the monkey god have significantly diminished. Expeditions have been closed, access restricted, and available information has become scarce. Some suggest it is a deliberate decision to protect a fragile heritage. Others believe there is something there that must not be revealed. Perhaps it is not simply an ancient city. Perhaps it is a portal to a bigger, deeper story, involving other species, other eras, other truths. Today, the White City remains hidden beneath layers of mud, roots, and time. The passage of modern man has barely scratched its surface. But what has already been found, the sculptures, the structures, the symbols, is enough to know that something very strange happened there. A vanished civilization that worshipped beings we still do not understand, that carved in stone their fears, their myths, and perhaps their end. And in that lost corner of Honduras, where the jungle never ceases to murmur, there are those who claim that at night, something moves among the shadows, something large, something that watches in silence, something that remembers. If you have made it this far, you are now part of this expedition into the Enigma. Tell me in the comments, which of these mysteries made you question everything? Which one kept you awake at night or gave you dreams? If you are passionate about the secrets of the past that still resist answers, this channel is your refuge. Subscribe so you do not miss what history forgot and activate the bell, because here, darkness is not the end. It is only the beginning. Good night.